The Architecture of Connection, How to Master Relationships, Communication, and the Art of Living Fully. Prologue, the Invitation. Let me tell you something strange. Imagine standing in a room full of people, a party, a conference, a family gathering. You're surrounded by faces, voices, laughter, and yet in that crowded space you feel completely, utterly alone. Not because you're physically isolated, but because something fundamental is missing. A bridge, a connection. The ability to reach across the invisible gap between yourself and another human being and actually be received. This is the quiet epidemic of our time. We live in the most connected era in human history. We carry devices in our pockets that can reach anyone, anywhere, instantly. We broadcast our thoughts to thousands with a single tap. And yet, we're lonelier than ever, more anxious, more uncertain about how to relate to each other, especially across the mysterious divide between men and women. I've spent a lifetime studying this problem, not from a distance, not as an academic exercise, but up close in the trenches of real relationships, real conversations, real heartbreaks, and real breakthroughs. I've sat with couples on the verge of divorce who rediscovered each other overnight. I've coached men who hadn't had a date in years, and watched them transform into men women genuinely wanted to be around. I've seen people paralyzed by the mere thought of speaking to a group of 5 colleagues stand up and hold an audience of 500 in the palm of their hand. And I've watched chronic worriers, people who hadn't known a moment of peace in decades, find a calm they never believed possible. Here's what all this experience has taught me. The problems we face in our relationships, our communication, and our inner lives are not separate problems. They are different faces of the same fundamental challenge. A man who can't talk to women isn't suffering from a lack of clever lines. He's suffering from a lack of authentic self-expression. A woman who feels unheard by her partner isn't experiencing a failure of love. She's experiencing a failure of translation. A professional who freezes at the podium isn't battling a speaking problem. They're battling a confidence problem that echoes through every area of their life, and the worry that keeps us up at night, the anxiety that gnaws at our peace. It's not a separate affliction. It's the exhaust fumes of a life lived out of alignment, disconnected from our true selves, our true desires, and our true ability to connect with others. This book is the map I wish someone had handed me decades ago. In the pages ahead, we're going to explore the hidden architecture of human connection, how it works, why it breaks down, and how to rebuild it stronger than ever. You'll learn why men and women so often feel like they're from different planets, and what to do about it. You'll discover the counterintuitive secret that makes certain people magnetic to others. You'll master the art of speaking so that people not only hear you, but feel what you're saying. And you'll acquire the mental tools to stop the endless cycle of worry and start actually living. This isn't theory. It's not abstract philosophy. Everything in these pages has been tested in the laboratory of real life, in thousands of relationships, hundreds of thousands of conversations, and countless sleepless nights turned peaceful. The journey we're about to take together will challenge some of your deepest assumptions. It will ask you to be honest in ways that might feel uncomfortable. But I promise you this: if you stay with me, if you apply what you learn, you will never see yourself or anyone else the same way again. Welcome to the Architecture of Connection. Let's begin. Part 1. The Hidden Dynamics of Attraction and Understanding. Chapter 1. The Secret Nobody Tells You About Attraction. Summary. In this chapter, we're going to uncover the single most important factor that determines whether people are drawn to you or pushed away. It's not what you think. It's not about looks, money, or memorized lines. We'll learn about the concept of emotional investment and how the balance of who cares more in any interaction silently controls everything. By the end, you'll understand why some people seem to effortlessly attract others, while equally good-hearted people struggle, and you'll have the foundation for transforming every relationship in your life. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who just seemed to have it? That magnetic quality that drew people toward them? They weren't necessarily the best-looking person in the room. They weren't the richest or the most accomplished, but when they spoke, people listened. When they entered a space, the energy shifted. And then there's the opposite experience, the person who tries so hard, who's genuinely kind and thoughtful, who would do anything for the people they care about, yet somehow always ends up feeling invisible, unappreciated, or taken for granted. What's the difference? I spent years asking this question. I watched thousands of interactions. I studied the research. I experimented with my own behavior and coached others to do the same. And what I discovered was so simple, it was almost embarrassing, yet so profound it changed everything. The difference comes down to one thing: the balance of emotional investment. Here's what I mean. In every interaction between two people, whether it's a first date, a job interview, a conversation at a party, or a marriage of 30 years, there's an invisible scale. On one side is how much emotional energy, attention, and concern you're investing in the other person. On the other side is how much they're investing in you. And here's the counterintuitive truth. The person who is less invested in the other person's opinion generally has more power in the interaction. Now let me be very clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you should be cold, uncaring, or manipulative. I'm not suggesting you play games or pretend not to care when you do. That's a shortcut to shallow connections and eventual misery. What I'm pointing to is something deeper, something about authentic self, worth, and genuine confidence. Think about it this way. Imagine two men at a party. Both see a woman they'd like to meet. The first man approaches her, and even before he opens his mouth, his body language is screaming a message. His shoulders are slightly hunched. His eyes dart around, checking her reactions. When he speaks, he laughs a little too hard at her jokes. He agrees with everything she says. If she mentions liking a particular band, he suddenly loves that band too. His entire focus is on one question: does she like me? What's he communicating without saying a word? He's communicating that her opinion of him matters more than his opinion of himself, that he's already decided she's the prize and he's the supplicant, that his emotional state depends on her approval. Now imagine the second man. He approaches the same woman, but his energy is fundamentally different. He stands tall. He makes eye contact comfortably, not staring, not looking away. When he speaks, he's genuinely curious about her, but he's also willing to disagree. If she mentions a band he doesn't like, he might playfully tease her about it. He has opinions and isn't afraid to express them. His underlying question isn't, does she like me? But I wonder if she's someone I'd enjoy knowing. What's the difference? The first man is needy. The second man is non-needy. And here's what decades of research and real-world experience have proven beyond any doubt. Neediness is the single most unattractive quality a person can display. It's more off-putting than bad breath, more damaging than saying the wrong thing, because neediness is never about the words you say, it's about the energy beneath the words. And human beings are exquisitely tuned to detect that energy, often within seconds of meeting someone. Here's why this matters, and it's crucial that you understand this. A man's attractiveness is inversely proportional to how needy he is. The less needy he is, the more attractive he becomes. The needier he is, the less attractive he is, no matter how good-looking, wealthy, or accomplished he may be. But what exactly is neediness? Neediness is placing a higher priority on what others think of you than on what you think of yourself. It's when your actions, your words, even your feelings are primarily motivated by winning approval rather than expressing your authentic self. A needy person is constantly adjusting themselves to fit what they think others want. They're the ones who laugh at jokes that aren't funny, agree with opinions they don't share, and sacrifice their own preferences to avoid conflict. They're running on a hidden program that says, I must earn love by being what others want me to be. A non-needy person, by contrast, places a higher priority on their own perception of themselves than on the perceptions of others. Their actions flow from their own values, their own desires, their own authentic self. They're certainly not immune to caring about others, quite the opposite. But their sense of worth doesn't depend on constant external validation. Let me give you a concrete example that will make this crystal clear. James and Jeff are both single men who want to find a relationship, but they approach dating from completely different places. When James meets a woman he likes, his entire world reorganizes around her. He rearranges his schedule at her whim. He buys her expensive gifts and takes her to the nicest restaurants, often spending money he doesn't really have. He forgoes plans with his friends. If she's upset, he sits patiently listening to her vent, agreeing with everything she says, even when he feels she's being unfair. He's terrified of conflict. He's terrified of disappointing her. He's terrified of losing her. And what happens? Despite genuinely caring for James, the women he dates rarely respect him. Something feels off. They can't quite articulate it, but they sense that James isn't being fully real with them. His constant agreeableness feels less like kindness and more like desperation. Sooner or later, usually sooner, they end the relationship. And James is devastated. He did everything right, he thinks. He was so good to her. Why doesn't anyone appreciate him? Then there's Jeff. Jeff enjoys his life. He has friends, interests, passions. When he's attracted to a woman, he's genuinely curious about her, but he's also clear about his own boundaries and preferences. He suggests dates that he genuinely enjoys, like a walk in the park or checking out a show he was going to see anyway. If the conversation reveals that they have little in common, he's comfortable saying so and moving on. He doesn't try to force a connection where none exists. When a woman doesn't text him back right away, Jeff doesn't spiral into anxiety. He figures she's busy, or maybe she's not that interested. Either way, his life goes on. He has things to do, people to see, a self to cultivate that exists independent of any romantic prospect. And here's the irony. Women are drawn to Jeff in a way they never are to James. They can't always explain why, but they sense something solid in him, something real. He doesn't need them to complete him. He's already complete. And that completeness, that non-neediness, is magnetic. Let me pause here because I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking, so the solution is to just not care about anyone? To be selfish? To treat people poorly? No, absolutely not. That's the trap on the other side. That's what I call narcissism, and it's just another form of neediness wearing a mask. The narcissist has the same core wound as the needy person, a desperate need for external validation. They've just developed a different strategy for getting it. Instead of trying to earn approval by being overly nice, they try to extract it by dominating others, by treating people as objects, by constantly asserting their own superiority. But make no mistake, the narcissist is just as dependent on others' opinions as the people pleaser. They've simply become skilled at getting attention through force rather than supplication. I've seen this pattern play out countless times. A man who spent years being the nice guy, always overlooked, always friend-zoned, finally snaps. He decides that being nice doesn't work, so he'll become the opposite. He starts treating women poorly, he withholds affection, he becomes dismissive, even cruel, and, to his amazement, he starts getting more attention. But here's what he doesn't realize. The attention he's getting isn't from healthy, confident women. It's from women who are themselves needy, women with low self-esteem who mistake his emotional unavailability for strength. The relationships that result are toxic. They're built on manipulation and insecurity rather than genuine connection. They may provide temporary ego gratification, but they'll never provide real fulfillment. No, the goal isn't to flip from one extreme to the other. The goal is to find the middle path, to care deeply while remaining grounded in yourself, to be genuinely invested in others without being dependent on their approval, to love without losing yourself. This is what I call authentic non-neediness, and it's the foundation upon which everything else in this book is built. Now here's the fascinating part, and this is where the science gets really interesting. This dynamic isn't just about dating. It's not just about romantic attraction. It's the operating system underlying all human relationships. When you're in a business meeting and you're desperately hoping your idea will be approved, you communicate neediness. Your voice might waver. You might rush through your presentation. You might unconsciously apologize for your own ideas. And the room senses it. When you're having dinner with friends and you're constantly seeking validation, was that funny? Did you like that story? Am I being entertaining? You create an uncomfortable dynamic. People feel subtly pressured to reassure you, and that pressure pushes them away. When you're in a committed relationship and you stop investing in yourself, when you abandon your friendships, your hobbies, your independent identity, you become less attractive to your partner. Not because they're cruel, but because the person they fell in love with is slowly disappearing. This connects to something profound that I learned through painful personal experience. Years ago, my wife and I had just had a baby. We were both exhausted beyond measure. She was in physical pain, barely able to walk. I was trying to help while also managing work. One day, she was particularly upset, and I, being defensive and tired, started to walk away. I was ready to leave the room, to escape the intensity of her emotions. And she said something that changed my life. "John, you're a fair weather friend. As long as I'm sweet, loving, and easy to be around, you're here for me. But as soon as I'm not, as soon as I'm struggling, you walk right out that door." Those words hit me like a freight train, because she was absolutely right. I had been measuring my willingness to be present by how pleasant the experience was for me. When she was happy, I was happy to be there. When she was in pain, I wanted to escape. My investment in her was conditional on her making me comfortable. That moment taught me something essential about love, about relationships, about being a fully present human being. Real love, real connection, requires the ability to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. It requires prioritizing the other person's well-being alongside your own, not instead of it, but in genuine balance. And here's the thing, you can't fake this. You can't pretend to be non-needy while secretly being desperate for approval. The truth always shines through. Always. Human beings have an almost supernatural ability to detect inauthenticity. We might not be able to articulate what feels off, but we feel it in our bodies. It's that subtle sense of unease, that instinct to pull back, that gut feeling that something isn't quite right. This is why techniques and pick-up lines and manipulation tactics ultimately fail. They might work for a moment, might create a temporary illusion, but the illusion always cracks. The neediness always leaks through. And when it does, the connection shatters. So what's the solution? How do you actually become less needy? How do you develop this magnetic quality of authentic non-neediness? The answer is both simple and challenging. You invest in yourself. Not as a strategy to attract others, not as a performance, but as a genuine commitment to your own growth, your own fulfillment, your own life. You develop interests that excite you. You build friendships that nourish you. You pursue goals that matter to you, not because they'll impress anyone, but because they're genuinely meaningful. You learn to enjoy your own company. You become someone whose happiness doesn't depend on constant external validation. You develop what I call an internal center of gravity, a sense of self that remains stable regardless of whether others approve of you or not. And paradoxically, when you do this, when you genuinely stop needing others' approval, you become wildly more attractive to others. Not because you're playing hard to get, not because you're being aloof, but because you're radiating something that healthy people are naturally drawn to: completeness. Think about the people you most admire, the people whose presence makes you feel good about yourself. Chances are they're not people who are constantly seeking your approval. They're not people who agree with everything you say. They're people who are comfortable in their own skin, who have opinions and boundaries and lives of their own. Their presence is a gift precisely because they don't need to be there. They choose to be there. And that choice, freely given, is infinitely more valuable than the desperate clinging of someone who has no other options. This is the foundation. Everything else we're going to discuss, every technique, every insight, every strategy, rests on this fundamental principle. If you miss this, nothing else will work. If you grasp this, everything else becomes easier. Key takeaway: your attractiveness to others, romantic, professional, and social, rises and falls based on one thing: whether you prioritize your own self-perception over others' opinions of you. The less you need approval, the more approval naturally flows toward you. Reflection prompt. Think about the last time you felt truly confident and at ease in a social situation. What was different about that experience? How much of your mental energy was focused on how others were perceiving you versus simply being present and engaged? Chapter 2. The counterintuitive power of being vulnerable. Summary. Most of us have been taught that vulnerability is weakness, something to hide, something to protect against. In this chapter, we'll discover that vulnerability is actually the gateway to genuine power and connection. We'll explore why exposing our imperfections, admitting our fears, and being honest about who we really are creates a magnetic pull that nothing else can match. By the end, you'll understand why the people we trust most are not the ones who seem perfect, but the ones who are brave enough to be real. If you're like most people, the word vulnerability probably makes you a little uncomfortable. It might conjure images of weakness, of exposure, of standing naked in front of a crowd while everyone judges you. It might feel like something to avoid at all costs. I used to feel the same way. For years, I built my life around the principle of appearing strong at all times. I hid my insecurities. I deflected criticism. I maintained a carefully curated image of competence and confidence. And you know what? It worked, sort of. I was successful. People respected me, but something was missing. My relationships, while functional, lacked depth. There was a ceiling on how close I could get to people, how much I could truly connect. Then two experiences taught me something that completely rewired my understanding of human connection. The first happened years ago. I had been dating a woman I really cared about, but early in our relationship I made the mistake of opening up. Really opening up. About my previous relationship. I went on a long, bitter rant about my ex. I shared every grievance, every resentment, every painful detail. When I finished, the woman I was dating looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not sympathy, but something closer to alarm. Quietly, she said, "I probably didn't need to know all of that." I was mortified. I had exposed something raw and ugly, and instead of bringing us closer, it had pushed her away. For months afterward, I would cringe at the memory. The second experience was entirely different. There was another woman, someone I was extremely attracted to and also quite intimidated by. She was confident, sexual, direct. When we were first getting physically intimate, I completely froze. I couldn't perform. My insecurities about my own experience and desirability crashed down on me, and my body simply shut down. This was a moment of maximum vulnerability. Every instinct screamed at me to make excuses, to blame it on alcohol, to deflect and protect my ego. Instead, I'm not sure why, I told the truth. I told her I was nervous. I told her I was inexperienced. I told her I was intimidated by her. And here's what happened. She didn't reject me. She didn't lose respect for me. She softened. She said she understood. She said we could take our time. And then, once the pressure was off and I felt safe, everything flowed naturally. We went on to have an incredible relationship, wild, passionate, deeply connected. Because I had been willing to be weak in front of her, she had been willing to be vulnerable with me in return. These two experiences seem contradictory, don't they? In one, vulnerability backfired spectacularly. In the other, it created deeper intimacy than I'd ever experienced. What was the difference? The difference was intention. In the first case, I wasn't being vulnerable. I was dumping. I was using this woman as an emotional trash can, unloading my unresolved baggage without any concern for how it might affect her. My intention wasn't connection, it was catharsis, and she rightly recoiled. In the second case, my vulnerability was genuine. I wasn't trying to manipulate her into feeling sorry for me. I wasn't trying to extract sympathy. I was simply telling the truth about where I was in that moment. And because my intention was authentic, her response was authentic too. This distinction is absolutely crucial, and it's where most people get vulnerability wrong. They think vulnerability means telling everyone your deepest traumas and expecting that to create connection. But that's not vulnerability. That's oversharing. That's emotional exhibitionism. And it repels people just as surely as coldness does. True vulnerability is about being honest without an agenda. It's about sharing who you are without requiring any particular response. It's about showing your rough edges, not because you want someone to smooth them, but because you're no longer willing to pretend those edges don't exist. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. Remember how in the last chapter we talked about neediness and non-neediness? Vulnerability is actually the most powerful way to demonstrate non-neediness. Think about it. A needy person is constantly trying to manage others' perceptions. They're curating an image, hiding their flaws, performing a version of themselves they think will be accepted. This is exhausting. and it's also transparent. People can smell the desperation beneath the performance. A truly non-needy person, by contrast, has nothing to hide. They're comfortable with their imperfections because their self-worth doesn't depend on appearing perfect. They can admit mistakes without crumbling. They can acknowledge fears without feeling diminished. They can show their rough edges because they know those edges are part of what makes them real. And here's the paradox. This willingness to be imperfect is precisely what makes them so attractive. When someone is brave enough to be real, it gives everyone around them permission to be real too. And real connection, deep, satisfying, trust-based connection, can only happen between real people. Let me give you an analogy that might help. Imagine two men at a social gathering. The first man is carefully composed. His hair is perfect. His clothes are expensive and precisely chosen. When he speaks, every word seems calculated to impress. He never makes mistakes. He never says anything controversial. He never laughs at himself. He's like a beautifully wrapped package. Impressive from the outside, but you have no idea what's inside. And honestly, you're not sure you want to find out. The second man is different. He's well groomed, but comfortable. He laughs easily, especially at himself. When he tells a story, he's as likely to share a moment of embarrassment as a moment of triumph. He has opinions and expresses them clearly, but he's also quick to say, "I hadn't thought of it that way," when someone offers a different perspective. He doesn't try to impress. He just is. Which of these men would you rather spend time with? Which would you trust more? Which would you be more likely to open up to? The answer is obvious. And it's obvious because we've all experienced both types. We know which one feels good to be around and which one feels like work. We know which one invites connection and which one maintains distance. This is what I mean when I say that vulnerability is a form of power. It takes tremendous strength to be unguarded in a world that often rewards pretense. It takes courage to risk rejection by showing who you really are. But the payoff for that courage is immense. Deeper connections, richer relationships, and a kind of magnetic authenticity that can't be faked. Now let me address something important here. Some people hear this message and think it gives them license to do whatever they want in the name of authenticity. They think vulnerability means having no filter, no boundaries, no concern for how their words affect others. This is a dangerous misunderstanding. Real vulnerability always coexists with respect. For yourself, yes, but also for others. Being vulnerable doesn't mean dumping your unfiltered emotions on everyone around you. It doesn't mean making inappropriate comments and then claiming you're just being honest. It doesn't mean expecting others to absorb your pain without their consent. Vulnerability, practiced correctly, is a gift you offer. It's an invitation to deeper connection. But like any invitation, it can be declined. And when it is, the vulnerable person accepts that gracefully, without resentment. They don't demand that others receive what they're offering. They simply offer it freely and let the chips fall where they may. This is why I often tell men who are struggling with women, stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to have the right line for every situation. Instead, get comfortable with being imperfect. Get comfortable with rejection. Get comfortable with the possibility that some people won't like you. Because when you're comfortable with that possibility, you become free to actually connect with the people who will. I've seen this transformation happen thousands of times. A man comes to me frustrated and confused. He's tried everything, memorizing lines, following scripts, playing games with texting response times. Nothing works. Or it works briefly and then falls apart. Then he tries something different. He stops performing. He starts being honest. He tells a woman he's interested in her without calculating the optimal timing. He admits he's nervous instead of pretending to be cool. He shares something real about himself instead of reciting a rehearsed story. And suddenly everything changes. Not because he's found some magic formula, but because he's finally showing up as a real person. And real people connect with other real people. This connects to what we explored in the previous chapter about authentic non-neediness. When you're genuinely comfortable with yourself, when you've done the work of developing your own center of gravity, vulnerability becomes natural. You don't have to force it. You don't have to strategize about how much to share. You simply are who you are. and you trust that the right people will appreciate that. But what if you're not comfortable with yourself? What if the idea of being vulnerable terrifies you? What if you've spent your whole life building walls and creating a persona and hiding your true self? This is where we need to talk about something I call the pain period. Whenever you make a significant change, whether it's learning a new skill, starting a new job, or transforming how you relate to others, there's an initial period of intense discomfort. Everything feels awkward. You make mistakes. You feel exposed. You want to retreat to the familiar, even if the familiar wasn't working. This pain period is where most people give up. They try being more authentic, have one awkward experience, and immediately retreat back to their old patterns. They conclude that vulnerability doesn't work, when what actually happened is they just hit the first speed bump on a long road. The truth is, if you've spent years, decades even, hiding your true self, the first attempts at being vulnerable are going to be messy. They're going to be awkward. They might even backfire, as my bitter rant about my ex-girlfriend did. That's not a sign that vulnerability is wrong. It's a sign that you're learning, that you're in the pain period, that you're doing the difficult work of rewiring deeply ingrained patterns. The key is to keep going, to learn from the awkward moments rather than being defeated by them, to gradually, over time, become more comfortable with being seen. I remember one man I worked with who was terrified of approaching women. He had built his entire social identity around being the funny guy, the entertainer. He could make people laugh, but he couldn't make genuine connections. Every interaction felt like a performance, and he was exhausted by the effort of constantly being on. We started small. I asked him in his next conversation with a woman to share one genuine thing about himself. Not a joke, not a funny story, but something real. Maybe an insecurity, maybe a hope, maybe a memory that actually mattered to him. The first time he tried this, he called me afterward almost in a panic. It was so awkward, he said. She didn't know what to say. I felt like an idiot. What happened next? I asked. Well, she actually opened up too. She told me about her own struggles. We talked for 2 hours. This is how it works. Vulnerability is contagious. When you're brave enough to go first, to lower your defenses and show something real, you give others permission to do the same. And that mutual realness is the soil in which genuine connection grows. Key takeaway: vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the courage to be seen as you actually are. And that courage, far from pushing people away, draws them closer than any performance ever could. Reflection prompt: what's one thing about yourself that you typically hide from others? What would it feel like to share that thing with someone you trust, not as a bid for sympathy, but simply as an act of honesty? Chapter 3. Why Men and Women Keep Missing Each Other. Summary. This chapter explores one of the most practical and immediately useful insights you'll ever learn. Men and women genuinely communicate differently. Not better or worse, differently. We'll discover the hidden patterns that cause endless misunderstandings, learn why men often try to fix when women want to share, and develop practical tools for bridging the gap. By the end, you'll have a translator's guide for the opposite sex that will transform your relationships overnight. Let me tell you about the night that changed everything for me. My wife and I had just brought our newborn daughter home. We were exhausted beyond words. She was in physical pain from the delivery, barely able to walk. I had been trying to help, staying home from work, doing what I could. But I was also drained, running on fumes, my patience paper thin. One evening, she was particularly upset. She had been in pain all day, the baby had been crying, and she felt completely overwhelmed. When I walked in the door, she immediately started telling me about everything that had gone wrong. I listened for about 30 seconds before my problem-solving brain kicked in. "Why didn't you call me at work?" I asked. "I could have come home." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. "I shouldn't have to call you. You should know I need help." Now I was defensive. "How am I supposed to know if you don't tell me? I'm not a mind reader." Within 60 seconds, we were in a full-blown argument. Voices were raised, old grievances were unearthed. I was halfway to the door, ready to escape the intensity when she said something that stopped me cold. "Please don't leave. This is when I need you most. I'm in pain. I haven't slept in days. Please just hold me. You don't have to say anything. I just need to feel your arms around me." Something shifted in me. I walked back, sat beside her, and wrapped my arms around her. She cried. I held her, and gradually the storm passed. That moment was like a door opening into a room I had never known existed. I had spent our entire relationship trying to solve her problems. When she was upset, I would offer solutions. When she was frustrated, I would explain why she shouldn't be. When she was sad, I would try to cheer her up. I genuinely believed this was the loving thing to do. After all, when I had a problem, I wanted solutions. That's what made me feel better. But she didn't want solutions. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to feel understood. She wanted to know that she wasn't alone in her pain. This realization launched me on a journey that would consume years of research, thousands of interviews, and a complete re-examination of everything I thought I knew about communication between men and women. What I discovered can be summed up in one sentence that sounds absurdly simple but contains worlds of meaning. Men and women are different. Not wrong. Different. Now, I realize this statement might seem obvious. Of course men and women are different, you might be thinking. I already know that. But here's the thing. Knowing it intellectually and actually operating from that knowledge in the heat of a disagreement are two completely different things. Most of us, when we're in conflict with someone of the opposite sex, default to a single unconscious assumption. If they really loved me, they would react the way I would react. We use ourselves as the template for normal human behavior and judge any deviation as a personal failing. A woman thinks, if he cared about me, he would want to talk about our problems. He would share his feelings with me the way I share mine with him. So when her partner goes silent, she interprets it as rejection. She assumes he's shutting her out. She pushes harder to get him to open up, which only makes him retreat further. A man thinks, if she respected me, she wouldn't be upset about such a small thing. She would see that I'm trying to help and appreciate my solutions. So when his partner continues to express distress after he's offered fixes, he interprets it as ingratitude. He assumes she's being irrational. He either gets defensive or withdraws. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. Both are genuinely confused about why their loving intentions are being received as attacks. The problem isn't a lack of love, it's a lack of translation. So let's build that translator's guide. Let's explore the fundamental patterns that distinguish typical male and typical female communication. And let me be clear, I'm describing broad patterns. Every individual is unique. Some men communicate in more typically feminine ways, and some women in more typically masculine ways. These are tendencies, not absolutes. The cave and the wave. When men experience stress, they typically have an instinct to withdraw. I call this going to the cave. The man becomes quiet, focused inward, mulling over the problem silently. He may seem distant, unresponsive, even cold. But what's actually happening is that he's processing. He's thinking through the issue, searching for a solution, working it out internally. This is not a rejection of his partner. It's not a sign that he's angry or that he doesn't care. It's simply his natural way of dealing with difficulty. And if he's allowed to complete this process, to go into his cave and come out naturally, he'll return to the relationship refreshed and ready to engage again. But here's where the trouble starts. When a woman sees her partner withdrawing, she often interprets it through her own lens. For her, talking is the primary way of processing stress. When she's upset, she wants to talk about it, often in great detail, exploring every aspect of the problem, expressing all the emotions involved. This is not complaining for the sake of complaining. This is her natural way of working through difficulty. So when she sees her partner go silent, she assumes something is wrong between them. She tries to draw him out, asking questions, probing for feelings. But he's in his cave. The last thing he wants is to be interrogated. Her attempts to help feel like intrusions. He retreats further. She pursues harder. The cycle escalates. Meanwhile, when she's stressed and wants to talk, he hears her through his own lens. For him, talking about problems is generally done for one of two reasons. Either you're asking for advice, or you're assigning blame. So when she starts expressing her frustrations, his problem, solving brain immediately kicks into gear. He offers solutions. If she doesn't seem satisfied with the first solution, he offers another, and another. And when she still seems upset, he starts to feel either incompetent, his solutions aren't working, or blamed, she must be upset with him. Neither of them understands that she wasn't looking for solutions in the first place. She was looking for connection. The talking itself was the point. This pattern, what I call the cave and the wave, is responsible for an enormous percentage of relationship conflict, and the solution is deceptively simple. Understand the difference and adjust accordingly. For men, when a woman is sharing her feelings, your job is not to fix. Your job is to listen, to be present, to offer empathy, not solutions. Say things like, "That sounds really hard," or "I can see why you'd feel that way," or simply "Tell me more." Resist the urge to solve until she explicitly asks for your advice. For women, when a man withdraws into his cave, your job is not to pursue. Your job is to give him space. Trust that he'll come back when he's ready. Resist the urge to interpret his silence as rejection. It's not about you. It's about how he processes stress. The language barrier. Here's another critical distinction. Men and women often use the same words to mean completely different things. When a woman says, "I feel like you never listen to me," she's not making a literal claim about his listening habits. She's expressing an emotional experience in the moment. The word never is being used for emphasis, not as a factual statement. But the man often hears this literally. "Never? That's not true. I listened to you yesterday when you were talking about your co-worker, and last week when you were upset about your mother. Clearly, I do listen to you sometimes." And he proceeds to defend himself against an accusation she never actually made. What she was really saying was, "I'm feeling disconnected from you right now. I need to feel heard and understood. Can you give me your full attention?" Similarly, when a man says "I'm fine" in response to "What's wrong?" he's not being evasive or dishonest. In his mind, "I'm fine" is shorthand for "I'm dealing with something internally, and I don't need help. I'll be okay. Please don't worry." But the woman often hears, "I'm shutting you out. I don't trust you enough to share. There's something seriously wrong that I'm not telling you." And she pushes for more information, which only makes him feel pressured and less inclined to share. I've compiled what I call the phrase dictionary, a translation guide for the most commonly misunderstood expressions between men and women. Here are a few entries. When a woman says, "We never go out anymore," what a man hears, "You're failing as a partner. You're not romantic. You don't care about our relationship." What she actually means, "I miss spending quality time with you. I love it when we go out together. Can we plan something fun soon?" When a woman says, "This house is always a mess," what a man hears, "You're lazy and messy. I do everything around here. You don't appreciate how hard I work." What she actually means, "I'm feeling overwhelmed by the state of the house. I could really use some help. Would you mind tackling a few things?" When a man says, "It's not a big deal," what a woman hears, "Your feelings don't matter to me. Whatever you're upset about is stupid." What he actually means, "I have this under control. I can handle it. Please trust me to manage this." When a man says, "I need some time to think about this," what a woman hears, "I'm going to withdraw and punish you. I don't want to deal with this." What he actually means, "I'm processing. I need space to figure things out. I'll come back when I'm ready to talk." Understanding these translation differences can literally save relationships. I've seen couples who were on the verge of divorce suddenly realize that they've been misunderstanding each other for years, not because they didn't love each other, but because they were speaking different emotional languages. The rubber band effect. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Men have a natural intimacy cycle that works like a rubber band. A rubber band, when you stretch it, eventually reaches a limit and then snaps back. Men's need for closeness works the same way. A man can get very close to his partner, intimate, connected, deeply in love. But then inevitably, he'll feel an urge to pull away. Not because anything is wrong, not because he's falling out of love, but because he needs to re-establish his sense of independence before he can come close again. This cycle is automatic and unconscious. It's not a decision, it's an instinct. And when a man is allowed to complete this cycle, to pull away naturally and then come back on his own, he returns with renewed passion and connection. The rubber band has snapped back, and the intimacy is actually stronger than before. But many women, not understanding this cycle, panic when their partner pulls away. They chase after him, trying to force closeness. This prevents the rubber band from stretching fully, which means it never gets to snap back. The man feels trapped and never gets the chance to rediscover his own desire for intimacy. The solution, again, is understanding. When a man pulls away, give him space. Trust the cycle. He'll come back, and when he does, he'll be more present and connected than if you had tried to force closeness. The wave analogy. Women have their own cycle, which I describe as a wave. A woman's emotional state naturally rises and falls. When she's at the peak of the wave, she feels expansive, loving, generous. She has abundance to give, but then the wave inevitably crashes. She descends into a kind of emotional valley, a time when she feels more vulnerable, more needy, more aware of what's missing in her life. This descent isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a natural process of emotional house cleaning. During the downswing, she's processing accumulated stress, releasing pent-up emotions, clearing the decks for the next upswing. But many men, seeing their partner descend into the valley, feel an urgent need to pull her back up. They offer solutions. They try to cheer her up. They explain why she shouldn't feel the way she does. They do everything except what she actually needs, to be accompanied in the valley without judgment. What a woman needs during her downswing is not fixing. It's presence. It's someone to sit with her in the darkness, to listen without trying to change her feelings, to trust that she'll rise again on her own. When a man can do this, can be present without trying to rescue, he gives his partner an incredible gift. This intersects with what we discussed in the previous chapters about vulnerability and non-neediness. A man who can stay present with a woman's difficult emotions without needing to fix them is demonstrating tremendous emotional strength. He's saying through his actions, "Your feelings don't scare me. I can handle this. I'm not going anywhere." And that message, more than any solution, is what she needs to hear. The 12 kinds of love. What I've discovered through decades of working with couples is that men and women have fundamentally different core emotional needs. Not completely different, there's overlap, but the priorities are reversed. A woman's primary needs tend to be care, understanding, respect, devotion, validation, and reassurance. A man's primary needs tend to be trust, acceptance, appreciation, admiration, approval, and encouragement. Notice something interesting? These needs are reciprocal. When a man gives a woman the understanding she craves, she naturally responds with the trust he needs. When a woman gives a man the appreciation he hungers for, he naturally responds with the caring she desires. The system is designed to work in harmony, when both partners understand what the other actually needs. The problem arises when we give our partner what we would want, rather than what they need. A woman showers her man with caring and concern, not realizing that what he most needs is trust and acceptance. A man offers his woman solutions and advice, not realizing that what she most needs is empathy and understanding. Key takeaway: the conflicts between men and women are rarely about lack of love. They're about differences in communication style, emotional processing, and core needs. Understanding these differences and adjusting our behavior accordingly can transform even the most troubled relationships. Reflection prompt. Think about a recent conflict with someone of the opposite sex. If you replay that conflict now, with the insights from this chapter, what might have been happening beneath the surface? What was the other person actually needing that you might have missed? Previously in this audiobook, we've explored the hidden dynamics of attraction, discovering that the secret to being magnetic isn't about techniques or manipulation. It's about developing genuine self-worth that doesn't depend on others' approval. We've learned that vulnerability, far from being weakness, is actually the gateway to deeper connection. And we've begun to understand why men and women so often miss each other, despite their best intentions. Now we're going to dive deeper into the architecture of communication, how to speak so that others truly hear you, and how to listen so that others feel truly understood. Part 2. The Architecture of Communication, Chapter 4. The 3 Foundations of Magnetic Communication. Summary. Communication isn't just about words. It's about the three pillars that support every interaction: lifestyle, courage, and expression. In this chapter, we'll explore how living a congruent life, overcoming the fears that hold you back, and learning to express yourself authentically create a foundation for communication that attracts rather than repels. By the end, you'll understand why some people seem to effortlessly command attention, while others struggle to be heard. And you'll have a roadmap for developing these qualities in yourself. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met someone who could walk into any room and immediately command attention? Not through loudness or aggression, not through obvious effort, but through some invisible quality that made you want to listen to whatever they had to say. And have you ever experienced the opposite? Someone who, despite having good ideas and good intentions, seemed to fade into the background. Someone who struggled to hold attention, whose words seemed to evaporate the moment they were spoken. What's the difference? After decades of teaching and coaching, I've come to believe that effective communication rests on three pillars. I call them the three foundations, and they are lifestyle, courage, and expression. Let's take each one in turn. Lifestyle, the first foundation. The first foundation of magnetic communication has almost nothing to do with what you say. It has everything to do with who you are and how you live. Think about it this way. If you're deeply unhappy with your life, if you're stuck in a job you hate, if you have no passions or interests that excite you, if your relationships are draining rather than nourishing, that unhappiness will leak into every conversation you have. You won't be able to hide it. The most brilliant communication techniques in the world won't compensate for a life that feels empty. Conversely, if you're genuinely engaged with your life, if you have work that matters to you, interests that light you up, relationships that sustain you, that vitality will radiate from you naturally. You won't need to force charisma. It will simply be present, a natural byproduct of a life well lived. I remember working with a man who was struggling terribly with women. He was intelligent, reasonably attractive, had a good job. By all external measures, he should have been doing fine. But whenever he interacted with women he was attracted to, something fell flat. The conversations felt forced. The energy was off. When I asked him about his life outside of work, he looked at me blankly. "What do you mean? What do you do for fun? What are you passionate about? What gets you excited to wake up in the morning?" He thought for a moment. "I mostly watch TV. Sometimes I play video games. I hang out with my roommate." This man had built a life that required almost nothing from him. It was comfortable, it was easy, and it was boring, even to him. When he talked to women, he had almost nothing interesting to say because he was doing almost nothing interesting. His conversations defaulted to the weather, to his job, to generic questions about her life. There was no spark because there was no spark in his own life. Now contrast this with another man I worked with. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He didn't make a lot of money, but he was passionate about rock climbing. He spent weekends scaling cliffs. He had traveled to remote locations to tackle challenging routes. He had stories, funny ones, scary ones, deeply personal ones about overcoming fear and pushing his limits. When this man talked about climbing, he came alive. His eyes lit up, his gestures became animated. He didn't need techniques or tactics. His authentic enthusiasm was magnetic. Women were drawn to him not because he was trying to impress them, but because passion is inherently attractive. Here's the key insight. You attract what you are, not what you pretend to be. If you want to attract interesting people, you need to become interesting. If you want to attract passionate people, you need to cultivate passion in your own life. If you want to attract people who are alive and engaged with the world, you need to become alive and engaged yourself. This is what I mean by demographics. Not the statistical kind, the psychological kind. Your lifestyle, your interests, your values, these determine the kind of people who will naturally gravitate toward you. A man who spends his weekends at art galleries and poetry readings is going to attract a different type of woman than one who spends his weekends at sports bars and football games. Neither is better or worse, but they're different, and the compatibility of those differences matters enormously. One of the biggest mistakes I see men make is pursuing women who exist in completely different worlds from them. and then being surprised when there's no connection. A quiet, intellectual bookworm who tries to pick up women at loud nightclubs is setting himself up for failure. Not because there's anything wrong with him, but because the women he's approaching are unlikely to share his values, interests, or communication style. The solution isn't to pretend to be someone you're not. The solution is to put yourself in environments where you're likely to encounter people who share your natural affinities. If you love books, join a book club. If you're passionate about fitness, take group exercise classes. If you care about a political cause, volunteer for an organization. The best connections happen organically, in contexts where shared interests create natural bridges. This also means that expanding your life, trying new things, developing new interests, pushing beyond your comfort zone, isn't just good for you personally, it's good for your social life. Every new activity you pursue, every new skill you develop, every new experience you have becomes another point of potential connection with others. Courage, the second foundation. The second foundation of magnetic communication is courage. Specifically, the courage to act in the face of fear. Here's something that might surprise you. Almost everyone experiences fear in social situations. Fear of rejection, fear of looking foolish, fear of saying the wrong thing. The difference between people who communicate effectively and those who don't isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act despite it. I've given thousands of speeches in my life. I've taught public speaking for decades, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the fear never completely goes away. Even now, before I step onto a stage, I feel a flutter of nervousness. My heart beats a little faster. Here's something that might surprise you. Almost everyone experiences fear in social situations. Fear of rejection, fear of looking foolish, fear of saying the wrong thing. The difference between people who communicate effectively and those who don't isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to act despite it. I've given thousands of speeches in my life. I've taught public speaking for decades, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the fear never completely goes away. Even now, before I step onto a stage, I feel a flutter of nervousness. My heart beats a little faster. My palms might get slightly damp. This is normal. This is human. The question isn't whether you feel fear. The question is whether you let that fear stop you. Here's what I've observed. Most people who struggle with communication, whether it's public speaking, talking to strangers, or expressing themselves in relationships, aren't struggling with a skill deficit. They're struggling with fear. They know what they want to say. They just can't bring themselves to say it. This fear takes many forms. Sometimes it's the terror of approaching an attractive stranger. Sometimes it's the anxiety of speaking up in a meeting. Sometimes it's the dread of having a difficult conversation with a partner. But in every case, the fear serves the same function. It protects us from the possibility of rejection, embarrassment, or failure. The problem, of course, is that this protection comes at an enormous cost. Every time we avoid a conversation, we miss an opportunity for connection. Every time we hold back our true thoughts, we deny others the chance to know us. Every time we let fear win, we reinforce the belief that we can't handle the thing we're afraid of. So how do we develop courage? The same way we develop any other capacity, through practice. You don't become courageous by waiting until you feel brave. You become courageous by acting bravely, even when you're terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more than the fear. Let me give you a practical method that has helped thousands of people overcome their communication fears. I call it incremental exposure. The idea is simple. Instead of trying to leap directly from terrified to fearless, you take small, manageable steps that gradually expand your comfort zone. Each step should be challenging enough to stretch you, but not so challenging that it overwhelms you. For example, if you're afraid of talking to strangers, don't start by trying to have a deep conversation with someone at a party. Start smaller. Start by simply making eye contact with people you pass on the street. Once that feels comfortable, add a smile. Then add a simple hello. Then maybe a brief comment about the weather. Then maybe a question that could lead to a longer exchange. Each step builds on the previous one. Each success gives you evidence that the thing you feared wasn't as catastrophic as you imagined. Over time, your comfort zone expands until what once seemed terrifying now seems routine. This same incremental approach can be applied to any communication fear. Afraid of public speaking? Start by speaking up more in small group discussions. Then volunteer to give a brief update at a team meeting. Then offer to present for 5 minutes at a larger gathering. Gradually work your way up to the big presentation. Afraid of expressing your feelings in a relationship? Start by sharing something small and low stakes. Mention a movie that moved you. Talk about a childhood memory. As you build trust and see that vulnerability doesn't destroy you, you can gradually share deeper things. The key is consistency. Courage is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows stronger with regular exercise. If you only use it occasionally, it atrophies. If you use it daily, it becomes robust. Expression, the third foundation. The third foundation of magnetic communication is expression, the actual skill of conveying your thoughts, feelings, and intentions to others in a way that lands. This is what most people think of when they think about communication skills. How to tell stories, how to use humor, how to structure a presentation, how to make small talk. And yes, these skills matter, but they matter less than most people think. Here's why. The content of what you say is far less important than the intention behind it. I've seen people captivate audiences with stories about their grocery shopping. I've seen people bore audiences to tears while talking about the most dramatic events imaginable. The difference wasn't the subject matter. It was the energy, the authenticity, the emotional truth that the speaker brought to their words. This connects back to what we discussed in the first 2 chapters about neediness and vulnerability. When you're speaking from a place of non-neediness, when you're not desperately seeking approval or terrified of judgment, your natural expressiveness emerges. You become more animated. Your voice becomes more varied. You access humor and emotion more easily. The technical aspects of communication take care of themselves because you're no longer in your head, monitoring and controlling everything. That said, there are some practical skills worth developing. Let me share a few that have proven consistently valuable. First, learn to structure what you say. The human brain processes information best when it's organized. Before you speak, whether it's a formal presentation or an important conversation, take a moment to clarify your main points. What are the 3 things you most want the other person to understand? What's the core message you're trying to convey? One of the most effective structures I've found is what I call the magic formula. Example, point, reason. Start with a concrete example, a story or illustration that captures attention and makes your message vivid. Then state your point clearly and succinctly. Then explain the reason, why this matters, what's at stake, what the other person should do with this information. This structure works for almost any communication context. Want to persuade a client? Start with a story about how your product helped someone like them. Want to give feedback to an employee? Start with a specific instance of what they did, then explain the impact, then suggest what to do differently. Want to connect with someone at a party? Share a brief anecdote from your life, then relate it to them, then ask about their experience. Second, learn to speak in pictures. Abstract language is forgettable. Concrete imagery is memorable. Instead of saying, "I was nervous," say, "My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup." Instead of saying, "It was a beautiful day," say, "The sunlight was filtering through the leaves like golden coins scattered on the ground." Specific sensory details bring your words to life and make them stick in the listener's mind. Third, learn to use your voice as an instrument. Pay attention to your pace, your volume, your pitch. Vary them. A monotone voice, no matter how brilliant the content, will put people to sleep. A voice that rises and falls with emotion, that speeds up with excitement and slows down for emphasis, that uses silence as effectively as sound, that voice holds attention. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, learn to listen. The best communicators are often the best listeners. They're not just waiting for their turn to speak. They're genuinely absorbing what the other person is saying, responding to it, building on it. This creates a sense of connection that no amount of brilliant monologuing can match. Putting it all together, these 3 foundations, lifestyle, courage, and expression, are interconnected. They reinforce each other. A rich lifestyle gives you interesting things to talk about. which makes expression easier. Courage allows you to seize opportunities to practice expression, which builds skill and confidence. Improved expression opens doors to new experiences and relationships, which enriches your lifestyle. It's a virtuous cycle. But they can also work against each other. A depleted lifestyle saps your confidence, which makes courage harder. A lack of courage prevents you from practicing expression, which keeps you stuck. Poor expression leads to negative social experiences, which makes you less motivated to build an interesting life. The key is to work on all three simultaneously, with special attention to the one that's currently your weakest link. For some people, the primary issue is lifestyle. They simply need to get out more, try new things, build a life worth sharing. For others, it's courage. They know what they want to say, but fear holds them back. For still others, it's expression. They're living an interesting life and willing to put themselves out there, but they struggle to convey themselves effectively in words. Wherever you are, the path forward starts with honest self-assessment. Which of these three areas needs the most work? What's one small step you could take this week to strengthen that foundation? Key takeaway. Communication isn't just about technique. It's about the whole person. Live an interesting life, develop the courage to act despite fear, and learn to express yourself authentically. These three foundations, working together, create a magnetism that no technique alone can match. Reflection prompt. Which of the three foundations is currently your strongest? Which is your weakest? What's one concrete action you could take this week to strengthen your weakest foundation? Chapter 5. The Art of Speaking, so others listen. Summary. Most people approach public speaking, and indeed most communication, with the wrong focus. They obsess over themselves, how they look, how they sound, whether they'll mess up. In this chapter, we'll learn the paradoxical secret of effective speaking. The less you focus on yourself, the more compelling you become. We'll explore practical techniques for preparation, delivery, and overcoming the fear that holds so many people back. By the end, you'll have a toolkit for speaking confidently in any situation, from a casual conversation to a formal presentation. I'll never forget the first time I tried to teach public speaking. It was 1912. The Titanic had just sunk. I was a young man in New York City, teaching night classes at the YMCA. I had no idea what I was doing. I had been trained in the old school of elocution, the formal, stiff, overly dramatic style of speaking that was popular in the 19th century. I assumed my job was to teach my students that same style. I was wrong. My students weren't interested in dramatic gestures and formal rhetoric. They were businessmen, salesmen, clerks, regular people who needed to communicate effectively in their actual lives. They needed to give reports at meetings, pitch ideas to clients, speak up in community organizations. They didn't need to sound like Shakespearean actors. They needed to sound like themselves, but better versions of themselves. When I finally understood this, I threw out the textbooks. I stopped trying to teach technique and started helping people access their natural ability to communicate. The results were transformative. People who had been terrified of speaking found themselves actually enjoying it. People who had stumbled over their words found fluency. People who had hidden in the back of every meeting found themselves volunteering to lead. What I learned in those early years became the foundation for everything I've taught since. And the core insight is this. Effective speaking isn't about performing. It's about connecting. Let me break this down into practical, actionable principles. First, speak about what you know. The number one mistake novice speakers make is choosing topics they think will impress their audience, rather than topics they genuinely care about. They give speeches about abstract concepts, democracy, justice, leadership, that they've never deeply engaged with. The result is always the same, a bland, generic talk that could have been given by anyone. The great speakers are different. They speak from experience. They tell stories from their own lives. They share lessons they've learned firsthand. When you speak about what you've actually lived, you don't need notes. The material is in your bones. It comes out naturally, with conviction and authenticity. I once heard a speaker begin a talk by declaring, "Liberty, equality, fraternity, these are the mightiest ideas in the dictionary of mankind." He was about to launch into a generic, preachy sermon when his instructor stopped him and asked a simple question. What makes you believe that? The speaker paused. Then he told a story. He had been a French underground fighter during the war. He had experienced the loss of freedom firsthand. He had watched friends die. He had escaped the secret police and made his way to America. When he talked about liberty now, he wasn't reciting platitudes. He was sharing something real. The audience was captivated. The same man, talking about the same topic, went from boring to mesmerizing in the space of 30 seconds. Not because he changed his topic, but because he connected it to his actual experience. Here's the lesson. You already have everything you need to give a compelling talk. Your life, your struggles, your triumphs, your lessons learned is a rich source of material. You don't need to research abstract topics. You need to mine your own experience for the stories that illustrate universal truths. Think about your life. What have you learned about hard work, about failure, about love, about fear? What moments stand out in your memory as turning points? What experiences shaped who you are? These are your topics. They're better than anything you could find in a book of quotations because they're uniquely yours. Second, be excited about what you're saying. The most important quality in any speaker is enthusiasm. If you're not excited about your topic, why should anyone else be? Enthusiasm is contagious. When you genuinely care about what you're saying, your audience will care too, even if they didn't think they cared before. I remember a man in one of my classes who was passionate about pigeons. Pigeons. He had studied them for years. He knew everything about their breeding, their behavior, their history. When he talked about pigeons, he was practically vibrating with excitement. And you know what? We were fascinated. Not because we cared about pigeons, but because his passion was so compelling that it made us care. The lesson: if you can't get excited about your topic, find a different topic. There's always something you can speak about with genuine enthusiasm. Your hobby, your family, a challenge you've overcome, a cause you believe in. When you speak from genuine passion, you bypass the need for technique. The enthusiasm carries everything. Third, prepare, but don't memorize. One of the biggest mistakes speakers make is writing out their speech word for word and then trying to memorize it. This almost never works. Memorized speeches sound stiff and unnatural. Worse, if you lose your place, you're completely lost. You have no thread to pick up because you were relying on exact words rather than ideas. The better approach: prepare thoroughly but memorize nothing. Know your material so well that you could talk about it for hours in a dozen different ways. Develop a clear structure. Your main points, your key stories, your opening and closing, but leave the exact words to the moment. This allows you to be flexible, to respond to the audience, to sound like a human being rather than a robot. One effective method: practice your talk by having conversations about your topic with friends. At lunch, at dinner, in casual settings, bring up the ideas you're planning to speak about. Notice what people respond to. Notice what questions they ask. Notice what parts you get excited about and what parts feel flat. This informal rehearsal is far more valuable than standing in front of a mirror reciting memorized words. Fourth, connect with your audience. Remember that speaking is a relationship. It's not a performance for a passive audience. It's a conversation, even if you're the only one talking. The best speakers make their audience feel seen and included. Here are some ways to do this. Use names when appropriate. If you're speaking to a group where you can reference specific people, do so. It creates an immediate sense of connection. Talk in terms of the audience's interests. Don't just present information. Explain why that information matters to them. What's in it for them? What problem does it solve? What question does it answer? Use you rather than they. Instead of saying, "People often struggle with public speaking," say, "You might have experienced this yourself." That moment when you stand up to speak and your mind goes blank. This simple shift makes your talk feel personal rather than abstract. Show sincere appreciation. If you're speaking to a group that has accomplished something, acknowledge it. If the organization has a proud history, mention it. People warm to speakers who take the time to understand and appreciate them. Fifth, conquer the fear. Almost everyone experiences some degree of nervousness before speaking. This is normal. In fact, a certain amount of nervousness can actually improve your performance. It sharpens your focus, gives you energy, and keeps you from being flat and lethargic. The problem isn't the nervousness itself. The problem is letting the nervousness paralyze you. Here are some practical techniques for managing speaking anxiety. First, prepare thoroughly. The more confident you are in your material, the less room there is for anxiety. When you know your topic inside and out, you have a safety net. Even if you get flustered momentarily, you can always return to what you know. Second, practice in low-stakes settings. Give your talk to a friend, to your spouse, to your dog. Each practice run builds confidence and familiarity. Third, focus on your message, not on yourself. The root of most speaking anxiety is self-consciousness, worrying about how you look, how you sound, what people think of you. But if you shift your focus to your message, to the importance of what you're saying and the value it has for your audience, your self-consciousness diminishes. You become absorbed in your content and the anxiety fades into the background. Fourth, act confident even if you don't feel it. This isn't fake, till you make it in a superficial sense. It's based on a genuine psychological principle. Our emotions follow our actions. If you stand tall, breathe deeply, and speak with conviction, your brain receives the message that you're confident, and gradually you become so. As the great psychologist William James said, action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feeling go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling. Sixth, master the impromptu talk. In real life, most speaking opportunities don't come with advance notice. You're in a meeting and someone says, "What do you think about this?" You're at a dinner party and the host says, "Say a few words." You're at a networking event and someone asks about your work. The ability to speak well on your feet is invaluable, and it's a skill that can be developed. Here's a method that works. When you're asked to speak without preparation, immediately think of a relevant experience or story. Start with that story. Don't try to formulate a thesis or an argument. Just tell the story. Stories are easy to tell because they have a natural structure. They engage the audience immediately, and they buy you time to figure out what point you want to make. Once you've told your story, connect it to the situation at hand. The reason I mention this is that it relates to what we're discussing. This creates a bridge from your anecdote to your message. Then state your point clearly and sit down. The best impromptu speakers are often the briefest. They say something meaningful and then stop, leaving the audience wanting more rather than checking their watches. Seventh, end with purpose. The way you finish your talk is at least as important as the way you begin it. A weak ending can undermine an otherwise excellent presentation. A strong ending can rescue a mediocre one. The most common mistake speakers make is not knowing how to stop. They trail off with, "Well, I guess that's about it." Or so, "Yeah." This leaves the audience feeling unsatisfied. Instead, plan your ending. Know exactly what your final words will be. A good ending does one of three things. It summarizes your main points, it issues a call to action, or it leaves the audience with a memorable image or idea. If you're speaking to persuade, end with a clear, specific request. Don't say, "I hope you'll consider supporting our cause." Say, "Sign the petition at the back of the room before you leave tonight." Be concrete. Make it easy for people to act. If you're speaking to inform, end with a concise summary of your key points. Help the audience remember what you've told them. If you're speaking to inspire, end with a story or image that captures the emotional essence of your message. And then when you've finished, stop. Don't apologize. Don't add qualifiers. Don't undermine yourself. Say what you came to say and sit down with confidence. Key takeaway. Great speaking isn't about performance. It's about authentic connection. Speak from experience. Share your genuine enthusiasm. Prepare without memorizing. And always keep your audience's needs at the center of your message. Reflection prompt. What's a topic you could speak about with genuine enthusiasm? Something you've lived, learned, and care about deeply. How might you structure a brief talk about that topic, starting with a story from your experience? Chapter 6. The Art of Listening. So others feel heard. Summary. Listening seems passive, but true listening is one of the most powerful things you can do in any relationship. In this chapter, we'll explore why listening is so transformative, What gets in the way of genuine listening, and practical techniques for becoming the kind of listener that makes others feel truly understood. By the end, you'll understand why the most charismatic people are often the best listeners. And you'll have tools for deepening every relationship through the simple act of paying attention. There's a paradox at the heart of human connection. The people we feel closest to are rarely the ones who said the most brilliant things. They're the ones who listened. Think about it. Think about the person in your life who you most trust, who you most enjoy being around, who you feel most seen by. Chances are that person is an exceptional listener. When you talk to them, you feel like you have their full attention. They're not checking their phone. They're not looking over your shoulder. They're not formulating their response while you're still speaking. They're just there with you. Present. This quality, the ability to listen deeply, is far rarer than it should be. Most of us spend our conversations focused on ourselves, what we're going to say next, how we're being perceived, whether we're being interesting enough. We're so caught up in our own internal monologue that we barely register what the other person is actually saying. The result is a world full of parallel monologues masquerading as conversations. People talking past each other, people feeling unheard, people concluding that no one really understands them. Becoming a better listener isn't just about being polite. It's about becoming the kind of person others want to open up to. It's about building relationships that have depth and trust. It's about accessing a level of human connection that most people never experience. The difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is a physiological process. Sound waves enter your ears and your brain registers them. You can hear someone perfectly while understanding almost nothing they're saying. Listening is an active, intentional process. It requires focus. It requires putting aside your own agenda for a moment and genuinely trying to enter someone else's world. It requires curiosity about what they think, feel, and mean. Most of us have been trained our whole lives to be better talkers. We learn to speak in school. We practice presentations. We worry about being articulate and clever. But almost none of us have ever been trained to listen. We assume listening is natural, that it just happens. And because we assume it's natural, we never practice it, never develop it, never realize how much room for improvement exists. What gets in the way of listening? There are several common barriers to genuine listening. First, the urge to solve. Especially for men, when someone shares a problem, the immediate instinct is to offer a solution. This comes from a good place. We want to help. But often, what the person needs isn't a solution. They need to feel understood. When you jump to solving, you short-circuit the connection. The person feels like you didn't really hear them. You just waited for them to stop talking so you could dispense advice. Second, the urge to defend. When someone expresses a feeling that seems to implicate us, I felt hurt when you said that. Our instinct is to explain, to justify, to argue why they shouldn't feel that way. But feelings don't respond to logic. Trying to argue someone out of their feelings usually makes them feel more unheard, not less. Third, the urge to relate. When someone shares an experience, we often immediately respond with our own parallel experience. Oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you what happened to me. This seems like connection, but it's actually a subtle form of one-upmanship. Instead of staying with their experience, we're redirecting attention into ourselves. Fourth, distraction. Our phones, our thoughts, our planning what to say next, our monitoring of the environment. Genuine listening requires clearing the mental space to be fully present, and most of us rarely do that. What genuine listening looks like. So what does it look like to actually listen? Let me describe the experience from the perspective of the person being heard. When someone is truly listening to you, you feel safe. You feel like you can say what's actually on your mind without being judged or interrupted. You feel like the listener is curious about your experience, not waiting for their turn to talk, but genuinely interested in understanding you. You feel like you can take your time. There's no rush. You can pause, search for words, backtrack, clarify. The listener isn't impatient. They're not finishing your sentences. They're giving you space to express yourself fully. You feel like the listener is on your side, not necessarily agreeing with everything you say, but trying to understand your perspective. Even if they disagree, they first make sure they've understood. So what I'm hearing is, they might say, "Is that right?" And they wait for you to confirm or correct before responding. This kind of listening is a gift. It's rare, and it's transformative. I've seen relationships completely change when one person finally felt truly heard by the other. Practical listening techniques. Here are some specific practices that will make you a better listener. Give your full attention. When someone is speaking to you, put down your phone, turn away from your computer, make eye contact. Your body language communicates as much as your words. If you're physically oriented toward the person, leaning in slightly, making comfortable eye contact, you're saying, "I'm here with you," without uttering a syllable. Use minimal encouragers. These are small verbal and non-verbal cues that show you're tracking. Yes, I see. A nod. These signals tell the speaker you're still with them, without interrupting their flow. Reflect back what you're hearing. This doesn't mean parroting their words. It means summarizing the essence of what they've said to confirm your understanding. So it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed by the new project, and you're not sure you have the resources you need. Is that right? This does two things. It ensures you've actually understood, and it makes the speaker feel heard. Ask open-ended questions. Instead of questions that can be answered with yes or no, ask questions that invite exploration. What was that like for you? How did you feel when that happened? What do you think you'll do next? Validate feelings before offering solutions. When someone is upset, the most helpful thing you can do first is acknowledge their emotional experience. That sounds incredibly frustrating. I can see why you'd be angry about that. It makes sense that you'd feel scared. Once they feel understood, they'll be much more receptive to problem solving, if they even want problem solving at all. Resist the urge to fill silence. When someone pauses, don't immediately jump in with a response. They might be thinking, they might be gathering courage to say something difficult. Give them space. A few seconds of silence can open the door to deeper sharing. Listening in difficult conversations. The real test of listening comes in difficult conversations. When you're being criticized, when emotions are high, when you desperately want to defend yourself. In these moments, the instinct to stop listening is powerful. Your brain is screaming at you to interrupt, to explain, to fight back. But this is precisely when listening matters most. Here's what I've learned. When someone is upset with you, the fastest way to de-escalate the situation is to listen. Not to agree. You don't have to agree. But to demonstrate that you've heard and understood their perspective. Try this. The next time someone criticizes you, instead of immediately defending yourself, say, "Tell me more about that. I want to understand." Then actually listen. When they're finished, reflect back what you heard. So you felt disrespected when I interrupted you in the meeting. You felt like your ideas weren't being valued. Often this alone is enough to transform the conversation. The person feels heard. Their emotional intensity decreases. And now you have actual information to work with, rather than just reacting to the surface-level criticism. This is especially important in relationships between men and women, where, as we discussed in the previous chapter, communication styles often clash. A man who learns to listen, really listen, to his partner will transform their relationship. And a woman who learns to listen, really listen, to her partner's silences will discover depths she never knew existed. Key takeaway. Listening isn't passive. It's one of the most active, powerful things you can do in any relationship. When you truly listen, you give the other person a rare and precious gift. The experience of being fully seen and understood. Reflection prompt. Think about a recent conversation where you felt truly heard by someone. What did they do that made you feel that way? How could you bring more of that quality to your own listening? Previously in this audiobook. We've explored how attraction works at the deepest level, understanding that neediness repels while authentic self-worth attracts. We've learned why vulnerability, far from being weakness, is the gateway to genuine connection. We've discovered why men and women so often misunderstand each other, and how a simple shift in perspective can transform those misunderstandings into opportunities for deeper intimacy. We've built the foundations of magnetic communication through lifestyle, courage, and expression. And we've explored the art of speaking and listening in ways that create real connection. Now we turn to the inner dimension, the thoughts, beliefs, and mental habits that determine whether we live in peace or in constant worry. Part 3. The Inner Architecture of a Peaceful Life. Chapter 7. The Great Illusion. Why most of what you worry about never happens. Summary. Worry feels productive. It feels like we're doing something about our problems, but the research is clear. The vast majority of what we worry about never comes to pass, and the worrying itself exacts a devastating toll on our health, happiness, and relationships. In this chapter, we'll explore where worry comes from, why it's so persistent despite being so useless, and the first steps toward breaking its grip on your life. By the end, you'll have a clear-eyed understanding of the true cost of worry and a powerful motivation to change. Let me tell you about a man I once knew. He was a successful businessman, respected in his community, financially comfortable. From the outside, his life looked ideal. But inside, he was living in a private hell. He worried about everything. His health, his finances, his children, his reputation. If he made a mistake at work, he would replay it in his mind for days, each replay more agonizing than the last. If his wife seemed slightly distant, he would construct elaborate scenarios of marital collapse. If the economy showed signs of slowing, he would lie awake at night calculating worst-case scenarios. He knew intellectually that most of what he worried about never happened. But that knowledge didn't help. The worry had a life of its own. It colonized his mind like an invasive species, crowding out peace, joy, and presence. One day, in a moment of unusual clarity, he decided to try an experiment. He took out a notebook and wrote down every single thing he was worried about. Then he dated the page and put it away. A year later, he found the notebook. He read through his list of worries, and what he discovered stopped him cold. Almost none of the things he had worried about had actually come to pass. The catastrophic scenarios he had constructed in his mind, the business failures, the health crises, the relationship disasters, had remained firmly in the realm of imagination. The few things that had actually happened were far more manageable than he had anticipated. But here's what really struck him. Even though the worries had been unnecessary, they had extracted a very real cost. He had lost sleep. He had been irritable with his family. He had made decisions based on fear rather than wisdom. He had missed countless moments of joy because his mind was always somewhere else, rehearsing disasters that never arrived. This experience, which I've seen repeated in countless variations, illustrates a fundamental truth about worry. Worry is a misuse of the imagination. It takes our remarkable capacity to envision possible futures and turns it against us, filling our minds with vivid images of everything that could go wrong. And the data confirms what this man discovered personally. Repeated studies have found that approximately 85 to 90% of what people worry about never actually happens. Of the 10 to 15% that does come to pass, most people discover that they handled it far better than they anticipated, and that the worrying beforehand didn't help them one bit. So why do we keep worrying? If it's so clearly useless, why is it so hard to stop? The origins of worry. Worry has deep evolutionary roots. Our ancestors who worried about predators, about food shortages, about hostile neighboring tribes, they were more likely to survive than those who blissfully ignored potential dangers. Worry in moderation has survival value. It motivates us to prepare, to plan, to take precautions. But modern life has hijacked this ancient system. We no longer face occasional, acute threats followed by periods of safety. We face chronic, abstract stressors that never fully resolve. We worry about performance reviews, about retirement savings, about what our children are doing online, about climate change, about political instability. These worries hum in the background constantly, keeping our stress response systems partially activated, never allowing full recovery. Moreover, worry has become a kind of magical thinking. We unconsciously believe that worrying about something prevents it from happening, or at least prepares us for it if it does. We treat worry as a form of problem solving, as if ruminating on potential negative outcomes somehow helps us control them. But here's the truth. Worry is not preparation. Worry is not problem solving. Worry is the illusion of control. Real preparation involves concrete actions, getting a medical checkup, updating your resume, having an honest conversation with your partner. Worry involves none of these things. Worry is just spinning in circles, churning through the same thoughts without ever reaching a resolution or taking productive action. The cost of worry. The toll worry takes on our lives is staggering, and I'm not speaking metaphorically. Dr. Alexis Carrel, a Nobel Prize-winning physician, once said, "Businessmen who do not know how to fight worry die young." He wasn't exaggerating. The medical evidence is overwhelming. Chronic worry contributes to heart disease, high blood pressure, digestive disorders, weakened immune function, chronic pain, and a host of other physical ailments. I once spoke with Dr. O.F. Gober, a medical executive for a major railway company. He told me something I've never forgotten. 70% of all patients who come to physicians could cure themselves if they only got rid of their fears and worries. These aren't imaginary illnesses. They're very real conditions that have their roots in chronic emotional stress. Stomach ulcers, insomnia, certain types of headaches, some forms of paralysis, all can be caused or exacerbated by worry. The mental cost is equally severe. Worry is exhausting. It consumes mental energy that could be used for creativity, for problem solving, for connecting with loved ones, for enjoying life. Chronic worriers often find themselves unable to concentrate, unable to relax, unable to be fully present in any moment, because their mind is always running anxious scenarios in the background. And the social cost? Worry makes us irritable, withdrawn, less available to the people we love. It strains our relationships. It robs us of the capacity for joy and spontaneity. When you're consumed with worry about the future, you can't be present for the only moment that actually exists. Now. The first step. Recognize the illusion. The beginning of freedom from worry is recognizing that most of what you worry about will never happen. This isn't just a comforting platitude. It's a statistically verifiable fact. Study after study confirms it. Experience confirms it. The worries that felt so urgent and so real 6 months ago, can you even remember what they were? I once asked a group of people to write down their 3 biggest worries. Then I asked them to estimate, percentage-wise, how likely each worry was to actually come to pass. Most people estimated fairly high probabilities, 30, 50%, even 80%. Then I asked them to look back at worries they'd had 5 years earlier. How many of those had actually materialized? The room went quiet as people realized the answer was almost none. This is the great illusion of worry. It feels so real, so justified, so necessary, and almost all of it is wasted energy on scenarios that exist only in imagination. The second step, live in day, tight compartments. One of the most powerful techniques for managing worry comes from Sir William Osler, one of the greatest physicians of the modern era. Osler was a medical student in 1871 when he read a sentence from Thomas Carlyle that changed his life. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. Osler took this insight and developed what he called living in day, tight compartments. The idea is simple but profound. Focus your attention on today. Not yesterday, that's gone. Not tomorrow, that's not here yet. Just today. Just the tasks, challenges, and opportunities that are actually in front of you. Think of a ship. Modern ocean liners are built with watertight compartments. If one compartment is breached, the doors seal shut, preventing the entire ship from flooding. Osler suggested we do the same with our attention. Seal off yesterday. Seal off tomorrow. Live in today's compartment. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't plan for the future. Of course we should plan. But there's a difference between planning and worrying. Planning is constructive, focused, and time-limited. You sit down, you figure out what needs to be done, you make your preparations, and then you return to the present. Worrying is none of these things. Worrying is endless, unfocused rumination that solves nothing and changes nothing. Each morning, Osler would remind himself of Christ's words, "Give us this day our daily bread. Not next week's bread, not next year's bread, today's bread. That's all we can eat. That's all we can live. The past is a memory. The future is a dream. The only reality is now." The third step, face the worst and improve upon. Another powerful technique comes from Willis H. Carrier, the engineer who pioneered modern air conditioning. Early in his career, Carrier faced a crisis. He had been hired to install a new type of gas cleaning equipment in a factory. The project went badly. The equipment didn't work as promised. Carrier was facing a loss of $20,000, an enormous sum at the time. He was consumed with worry. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. His mind spun in endless circles of anxiety. Finally, he realized that the worrying was getting him nowhere. So he developed a 3-step process. Step 1. Ask yourself, what's the absolute worst that could happen? Carrier determined that the worst case was losing his job and his employer losing the $20,000 investment. He wouldn't go to jail. He wouldn't die. The consequences, while unpleasant, weren't catastrophic. Step 2. Accept the worst, at least mentally. Carrier said to himself, all right, this will be a blow to my reputation. I might lose my position. But if that happens, I can find another job. It won't be the end of my life. Step 3. Now that you've accepted the worst, calmly work to improve upon it. With his anxiety significantly reduced, Carrier was able to think clearly. He realized that if they invested another $5,000 in additional equipment, the problem could be solved. They did this, and instead of losing $20,000, they made a profit of $15,000. This method works for a simple psychological reason. When we're consumed with vague, undefined anxiety, our minds can't function properly. We're paralyzed by fear of the unknown. But when we force ourselves to define the worst possible outcome, and then accept that outcome, the fear loses its power. We've already faced the worst in our minds. There's nothing more to be afraid of, and from that place of relative calm, we can actually take constructive action. Key takeaway: most worry is wasted energy, an illusion of control that accomplishes nothing while extracting enormous costs from our health, happiness, and relationships. The path to freedom begins with recognizing this illusion and learning to focus our attention on what actually exists, the present moment. Reflection prompt. Think about something you're currently worrying about. Now ask yourself, what's the worst that could realistically happen? Could you survive that? What constructive action could you take right now if you accepted that worst-case scenario? Chapter 8. How to break the worry habit before it breaks. New summary: worry isn't just an emotion, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken. In this chapter, we'll explore a toolkit of practical strategies for interrupting the worry cycle and replacing it with more productive mental patterns. From the power of keeping busy to the wisdom of accepting the inevitable, you'll learn specific techniques that have helped millions of people transform their relationship with anxiety. By the end, you'll have a repertoire of tools to draw on whenever worry threatens to take over. Worry, I've come to believe, is fundamentally a habit, and like any habit, it operates through a predictable cycle. Something triggers the worry: a comment from your boss, a news headline, a symptom in your body. Your mind immediately begins generating anxious scenarios. Your body responds with physical tension, tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a churning stomach. This physical discomfort seems to confirm that something is wrong, which generates more anxious thoughts, which increases the physical tension, and on the cycle goes, feeding on itself. Breaking this cycle requires interrupting it at multiple points. You need strategies for managing your thoughts, strategies for managing your physical state, and strategies for taking constructive action rather than spinning in circles. Let me share with you the most effective strategies I've discovered. Strategy 1. Keep busy. The first and perhaps most powerful anti-worry strategy is beautifully simple. Keep busy. There's a profound psychological reason this works. The human mind, as brilliant as it is, can only truly focus on one thing at a time. You cannot be fully absorbed in an engaging activity and simultaneously be consumed with worry. The two states are mutually exclusive. I've seen this principle save lives. During World War II, military psychiatrists discovered that the most effective treatment for soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, what we'd now call PTSD, was to keep them active. Not resting, not talking about their experiences endlessly, but doing things: fishing, hunting, playing sports, working with their hands. The activity didn't cure the underlying trauma, but it gave their minds something else to focus on, breaking the obsessive cycle of traumatic memories. The same principle applies to worry. When you find yourself spiraling into anxious rumination, the worst thing you can do is sit still and indulge it. The best thing you can do is get busy. Clean the house, go for a run, work on a project, call a friend, do something, anything, that requires your full attention. Winston Churchill, during the darkest days of World War II, was once asked if he worried about his enormous responsibilities. His reply, "I'm too busy. I have no time for worry." This isn't avoidance, it's strategic redirection. You're not suppressing your worries, you're simply refusing to give them your full attention, recognizing that attention is fuel and that starving the worry is often more effective than fighting it directly. Strategy 2. Use the law of averages. Many of our worries are based on exaggerated estimates of risk. We worry about things that are statistically extremely unlikely to happen, plane crashes, rare diseases, home invasions, while ignoring the far more probable risks that actually deserve our attention. The law of averages can be a powerful antidote to this distorted risk perception. When you're worried about something, ask yourself, what are the actual odds of this happening? Let me give you an example. I once met a man who was terrified of lightning. He would become anxious every time a storm approached. Finally, someone showed him the statistics. The odds of being killed by lightning in any given year are approximately 1 in 350,000. The odds of dying in a car accident are far, far higher, yet he never worried about driving. Seeing the actual numbers didn't eliminate his fear entirely, but it gave him perspective. He could say to himself, "Yes, it's possible that lightning could strike me, but it's so improbable that I'm not going to organize my life around that possibility." You can apply this to almost any worry. Worried about losing your job? What are the actual odds based on your company's history and your performance record? Worried about your child being kidnapped? The statistical likelihood is vanishingly small. Worried about a plane crash? You're far more likely to die driving to the airport. The law of averages doesn't mean bad things never happen. Of course they do. Someone has to be that 1 in a million. But organizing your emotional life around 1 in a million possibilities is a recipe for perpetual anxiety. Strategy 3. Cooperate with the inevitable. Some things in life are simply beyond our control. The weather, the economy, other people's behavior, our own mortality. Fighting against these inevitabilities doesn't change them. It only exhausts us. The psychologist William James offered profound wisdom on this point. Be willing to have it so. Acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. This isn't fatalism. It's not about giving up or ceasing to care. It's about recognizing the difference between what you can change and what you can't, and devoting your energy exclusively to the former. I once met a woman who had lost her husband suddenly. For months afterward, she was consumed with grief and anger. Why did this have to happen? Why him? Why now? The questions circled endlessly, never finding answers, never bringing peace. Then one day she had a realization. Her husband was gone. Nothing she could do would bring him back. All her anguish, all her rebellion against the reality of his death changed nothing. It only prolonged her suffering. She made a conscious decision to accept what she couldn't change. Not to like it. She would never like it. But to stop fighting it. And when she stopped fighting, something shifted. Her energy, previously consumed by futile resistance, became available for healing. She could remember her husband with love instead of anguish. She could begin to build a new life while honoring the old one. This is the wisdom of cooperating with the inevitable. When life hands you something you can't change, you have two choices. You can rail against it and make yourself miserable, or you can accept it and focus on what you can still control. Strategy 4. Put a stop. Loss order on your worries. In the stock market, wise investors use something called a stop-loss order. They decide in advance how much they're willing to lose on any given investment. If the stock falls below that threshold, it's automatically sold. No agonizing, no hoping it will rebound, no throwing good money after bad. We need the same discipline with our emotional investments. How much of your peace of mind is any particular worry actually worth? How much sleep? How much presence with your family? How much joy? Here's what I suggest. When you find yourself worrying about something, set a time limit. Say to yourself, I'm going to think about this for the next 15 minutes. I'm going to consider all the angles, all the possible solutions, all the worst-case scenarios. And then at the end of those 15 minutes, I'm going to make whatever decision I can make, take whatever action I can take, and then I'm going to let it go. This is a stop-loss order on your worry. You're deciding in advance how much of your mental and emotional energy this issue gets, and refusing to invest any more beyond that point. Benjamin Franklin learned this lesson early in life. As a boy, he paid far too much for a whistle that he desperately wanted. When he realized he had been overcharged, he was consumed with regret. Later in life, he reflected that many of the miseries he observed in others came from the same cause. They gave too much for the whistle. They invested too much emotional energy, too much worry, too much anguish in things that didn't deserve it. What whistle are you overpaying for right now? What worry are you investing far more energy in than it could possibly be worth? Strategy 5. Don't sow sawdust. Here's a simple truth that's surprisingly hard to internalize. You can't change the past. No amount of regret, rumination, or self-flagellation will alter what has already happened. The only thing you can do with the past is learn from it and then let it go. I call this not sawing sawdust. If you've ever worked with wood, you know that once a board is cut, you can't uncut it. The sawdust on the floor is useless. You can't reassemble it into a board. You sweep it up and move on. The past is sawdust. Your mistakes, your failures, your missed opportunities, they're done. You can't change them. You can only sweep up what's useful, the lessons, the wisdom, the hard-won experience, and carry that forward into the future. I know how hard this is. I've spent plenty of time sawing sawdust myself, replaying conversations, imagining how things could have gone differently, torturing myself with if only. But I've never once improved my situation by doing so. Not once. Every minute spent regretting the past is a minute stolen from creating the future. When you catch yourself ruminating on something that's already happened, try this. Say to yourself out loud if necessary, "That's done. I can't change it. What can I learn from it, and what do I need to do now?" This simple intervention can break the spell of the past and redirect your attention to the present. Strategy 6. Practice gratitude. Worry and gratitude cannot coexist in the same mind. They're like light and darkness. Where one is present, the other must be absent. This is more than just a nice sentiment. It's a neurological fact. Your brain has limited attentional resources. When you're focused on what you're grateful for, you literally cannot simultaneously focus on what you're worried about. The gratitude crowds out the anxiety. I knew a man who had lost both legs in an accident. When I met him, I was struck by how cheerful he seemed. I asked him how he managed to stay positive despite what had happened. He told me, "For a long time, I was angry. I raged against what had happened to me. But eventually I realized that my anger wasn't helping. It was just making me more miserable. So I started focusing on what I still had rather than what I'd lost. I still had my mind. I still had my family. I still had the ability to read, to learn, to contribute. The more I focused on those things, the less the loss of my legs defined me." This is the power of gratitude. It doesn't deny the reality of hardship. It simply refuses to let hardship be the whole story. It insists on recognizing the good that exists alongside the bad. One simple practice that many people have found helpful: at the end of each day, write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be profound. A good meal, a moment of connection, the way the light looked through the window. The practice itself, the act of deliberately turning your attention toward the positive, gradually rewires your brain to notice more of what's good and less of what's threatening. Key takeaway: worry is a habit, not a destiny. By keeping busy, using the law of averages, cooperating with the inevitable, setting stop-loss orders, refusing to sow sawdust, and practicing gratitude, you can break the cycle of anxiety and reclaim your peace of mind. Reflection prompt: which of these strategies resonates most with you right now? What's one worry you could apply it to today? Chapter 9. The Mind-Body Connection. How your thoughts shape your health. Summary: the connection between your mental state and your physical health is far more powerful than most people realize. In this chapter, we'll explore the scientific evidence linking emotional patterns to physical illness, and we'll learn practical techniques for harnessing the mind-body connection to improve both your health and your happiness. By the end, you'll understand why emotional well-being isn't a luxury, it's a medical necessity. Let me tell you something that might save your life. For decades, I've watched people worry themselves sick, and I mean that literally. I've seen successful executives develop bleeding ulcers from the stress of their jobs. I've seen housewives become bedridden with mysterious ailments that no doctor could diagnose, only to recover completely when their emotional burdens were lifted. I've seen men in the prime of their lives drop dead from heart attacks, their bodies finally surrendering to the relentless pressure they had been living under. The connection between mind and body is not some new age fantasy. It's hard medical science. And understanding this connection, learning to work with it rather than against it, can literally add years to your life. Dr. Alexis Carrel, the Nobel Prize-winning physician I mentioned earlier, put it bluntly: businessmen who do not know how to fight worry die young. He had seen it happen too many times. Men who had everything to live for, wealth, family, reputation, destroyed by their inability to manage the emotional pressures of their lives. But it's not just businessmen. It's everyone. Worry, anxiety, resentment, chronic anger. These emotional states aren't just unpleasant. They're toxic. They flood your body with stress hormones that over time damage your organs, suppress your immune system, and accelerate the aging process. Let me give you some specific examples. The Mayo Clinic, one of the world's most respected medical institutions, conducted a study of patients with stomach disorders. They found that 4 out of 5 had no physical basis for their illness. Their stomach problems were caused entirely by emotional factors: worry, fear, stress, resentment. Dr. Joseph Montague, author of a book on nervous stomach disorders, put it memorably: "You don't get stomach ulcers from what you eat. You get ulcers from what's eating you." High blood pressure, another silent killer, has been directly linked to chronic resentment and suppressed anger. Rheumatism and arthritis often flare up during periods of emotional stress. Even tooth decay has been connected to worry. One dentist reported that a patient who had always had perfect teeth developed 9 cavities in 3 weeks during a period of intense anxiety about his wife's illness. The list goes on. Thyroid problems, diabetes, heart disease, certain types of paralysis, all have been linked, in whole or in part, to emotional factors. Dr. Flanders Dunbar, a pioneer in psychosomatic medicine, once said that the only difference between a mental illness and a physical illness is the organ that manifests the symptoms. The root cause, emotional distress, is often the same. Now, I'm not suggesting that every illness is caused by worry. Obviously, there are many factors: genetics, environment, infection, injury. But the emotional component is far more significant than most people realize, and it's the one component we have the most control over. The relaxation response. If stress and worry can make us sick, then relaxation and peace of mind can help make us well. Numerous studies have demonstrated that practices like meditation, deep breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation can lower blood pressure, reduce inflammation, strengthen immune function, and even alter gene expression in ways that promote health. The key is learning to activate what's called the relaxation response, the body's natural antidote to the stress response. When you're stressed, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, muscles tense, stress hormones flood your bloodstream. This is useful for dealing with immediate threats, but devastating when it becomes chronic. The relaxation response is the opposite. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, muscles release, stress hormones decline. It's a state of deep rest that allows your body to heal and regenerate. The simplest way to activate this response is through controlled breathing. Try this. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and breathe slowly and deeply from your diaphragm. Inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 6. Do this for just 5 minutes, and you'll likely notice a significant shift in how you feel. Other effective methods include progressive muscle relaxation, systematically tensing and releasing each muscle group in your body, meditation, focusing your attention on a single point, such as your breath or a word, and visualization, imagining peaceful, calming scenes. The important thing is consistency. These practices work best when done regularly, not just when you're in crisis. Think of it as emotional hygiene, like brushing your teeth, but for your mind. The power of prayer and faith. I've noticed something remarkable over the years. People who have a strong religious faith tend to worry less and cope better with stress than those who don't. This isn't about any particular religion. It's about the psychological benefits of faith itself. When you believe that a loving, intelligent power is guiding the universe, that you're not alone, that your life has meaning, that there's a purpose beyond what you can see, it fundamentally changes how you experience difficulty. I once interviewed Henry Ford near the end of his life. He was in his late 70s, and I was struck by how calm and peaceful he seemed. I asked him if he ever worried. He replied, "No. I believe God is managing affairs and that he doesn't need any advice from me. With God in charge, I believe that everything will work out for the best in the end. So what is there to worry about?" This kind of faith doesn't mean you stop taking action or making efforts. It means you do your best and then release the outcome. You recognize that you're not in control of everything, and you stop trying to be. There's tremendous peace in that surrender. Even if you're not religious, the principle still applies. You don't have to believe in God to benefit from the practice of letting go of what you can't control. The Serenity Prayer, used in 12-step programs around the world, captures this wisdom perfectly. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Whether you address those words to God, to the universe, or simply to yourself, the wisdom they contain is universal. Rest before you get tired. Here's something most people don't realize. Fatigue dramatically amplifies worry. When you're tired, your emotional resilience drops. Small problems seem enormous. Minor frustrations become overwhelming. The same situation that you could handle easily when rested becomes a crisis when you're exhausted. This is why rest is not a luxury. It's a necessity for emotional well-being. And here's the key insight. You need to rest before you get tired, not after. Think about how your heart works. It doesn't pump continuously without breaks. It rests between every beat. In fact, if your heart beats 70 times per minute, the total rest time between beats adds up to about 15 hours per day. Your heart rests more than it works, and that's why it can keep going for 80, 90, even 100 years. The US Army discovered the same principle during World War II. They found that soldiers could march longer and perform better if they took regular rest breaks, even just 10 minutes per hour, rather than pushing continuously until exhaustion. The same principle applies to mental and emotional work. I've seen this principle transform lives. I knew a business executive who was burning out, working 16-hour days, never resting, constantly on the verge of collapse. He started taking a 20-minute nap every afternoon. His colleagues thought he was being lazy, but his productivity actually increased. He got more done in fewer hours, and most importantly, his chronic anxiety significantly decreased. Winston Churchill, who led Britain through its darkest hours during World War II, was famous for his afternoon naps. He worked from bed in the morning, napped after lunch, and often took another nap before dinner. Despite the enormous stress of wartime leadership, he maintained his energy and his sanity well into his 70s. The lesson is simple. Take rest seriously. Schedule it. Protect it. Don't wait until you're exhausted to take a break. By then, it's too late. Key takeaway: your mental state directly affects your physical health. By managing stress, practicing relaxation, cultivating faith or acceptance, and prioritizing rest, you can protect both your emotional well-being and your physical body. Reflection prompt. What's one change you could make this week to prioritize rest and relaxation? How might that change affect your overall sense of well-being? Previously in this audiobook, we've journeyed through the architecture of connection, how attraction works at the deepest level, why vulnerability is the key to intimacy, how men and women can finally understand each other, and how to communicate in ways that create genuine connection. We've explored the inner dimension, the worry habit that steals our peace, the physical toll that emotional distress takes on our bodies, and the practical strategies for reclaiming our mental freedom. Now, in our final section, we'll bring everything together. We'll explore how to make decisions that align with who you truly are, how to cultivate the attitudes that create lasting happiness, and how to build a life that doesn't just look good from the outside, but feels good from the inside. Part 4. Living a Life That Matters. Chapter 10. The Courage to Be Yourself. Summary. One of the greatest sources of unhappiness is the gap between who we really are and who we pretend to be. In this chapter, we'll explore why authenticity is so challenging, and why it's absolutely essential for a fulfilling life. We'll learn how to discover our true selves beneath layers of social conditioning, and how to find the courage to live from that authentic center. By the end, you'll understand why being yourself isn't just a cliché. It's the foundation of genuine happiness and genuine connection. I want to tell you about a woman who nearly destroyed her life trying to be something she wasn't. She was a singer, or wanted to be. She had talent, she had passion, but she also had a physical feature that she was deeply ashamed of: prominent front teeth. When she performed, she would try to hide them, pulling her upper lip down, contorting her face in ways that made her look uncomfortable and unnatural. Her career was going nowhere. Audiences could sense her discomfort. They could feel that she was hiding something, that her performance wasn't fully authentic. She was on the verge of giving up entirely. Then one night, a man in the audience approached her after a show. He had noticed what she was doing. "I know what you're trying to hide," he said. "You're ashamed of your teeth." She was mortified. But he continued, "What of it? Is there anything wrong with having prominent teeth? Don't try to hide them. Open your mouth wide. The audience will love you when they see you're not ashamed." She took his advice. She stopped hiding. She started being fully, unapologetically herself, and her career exploded. Her name, in case you haven't guessed, was Cass Daly, and became one of the most beloved comedians and singers of her era. The very feature she had tried to hide became part of her unique charm. I love this story because it illustrates something so fundamental about human connection. People are drawn to authenticity. We're exhausted by pretense. We're suspicious of perfection. When someone has the courage to be real, to be fully, unapologetically themselves, we feel it, and we respond to it. But being yourself is harder than it sounds. Most of us have spent our entire lives learning to be something else. From childhood, we're taught to fit in, to meet expectations, to present ourselves in ways that will be accepted. We learn to hide the parts of ourselves that might provoke judgment. We construct personas, the professional self, the social self, the romantic self, that we think will be more appealing than our raw, unfiltered reality. The tragedy is that these personas don't even work very well. They take enormous energy to maintain. They prevent genuine connection because no one can connect with a mask, only with the real person behind it. And they leave us feeling isolated, because even when we're surrounded by people who like us, we know they don't actually know us. The origins of inauthenticity. Where does this fear of being ourselves come from? Usually it starts early. Maybe you were the child who was told to be quiet when you wanted to be loud. Maybe you learned that certain emotions, anger, sadness, excitement, weren't acceptable in your family. Maybe you were praised for being good and punished for being difficult. Maybe you absorbed the message that your natural self was somehow wrong and that you needed to change to be loved. These early experiences create patterns that persist into adulthood. We learn to monitor ourselves constantly. We develop an internal critic that evaluates everything we say and do against the standards we've internalized. We become so accustomed to performing that we lose touch with what we actually think, feel, and want. I've seen this in countless people I've worked with. They come to me feeling empty, disconnected, unsure of who they really are. They've spent so long being what others wanted them to be that they've forgotten what they themselves actually want. The path back to yourself. The journey back to authenticity begins with a simple but profound question. What do I actually want? Not what you're supposed to want. Not what would impress others. Not what makes sense on paper. What do you want? This question can be surprisingly difficult to answer. We're so accustomed to filtering our desires through the lens of social acceptability that we often don't know what we genuinely want anymore. Here's an exercise that can help. The next time you're trying to make a decision, anything from what to eat for dinner to what career path to pursue, pause and ask yourself, if no one else would ever know about this decision, what would I choose? Strip away the social consequences. Strip away the need for approval. What emerges? Often, the answer that surfaces when we remove the pressure of others' opinions is very different from the answer we were about to give. This is a muscle that needs to be developed. Start with small decisions. Wear what you actually want to wear, not what you think others will approve of. Express opinions you actually hold, not ones you think will be popular. Spend your free time on activities you actually enjoy, not ones that look good on social media. Each small act of authenticity strengthens your capacity for more significant acts. Gradually, you become more comfortable in your own skin. You discover that the world doesn't end when you show up as yourself. In fact, people often respond more positively to the real you than they ever did to the performed version. The paradox of authenticity and growth. Here's an important nuance. Being yourself doesn't mean refusing to grow or change. It doesn't mean insisting that your current self is the final, definitive version. Authenticity is about being honest about where you are right now, including your desire to grow. It's about acknowledging your imperfections while also working to improve. It's about showing up as a work in progress rather than pretending to be a finished product. The most attractive quality in any person is not perfection. It's genuine engagement with life. The willingness to learn, to evolve, to be shaped by experience while remaining grounded in your core values. Think about the people you most admire. Chances are they're not perfect. They have rough edges. They've made mistakes. What makes them admirable is that they own their journey. They don't pretend to have it all figured out. This is what I mean when I talk about vulnerability. Being yourself means being willing to be seen in your incompleteness. It means admitting what you don't know. It means sharing your struggles along with your successes. It means letting go of the exhausting pretense of having everything under control. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to appear perfect, people trust you more. When you admit your limitations, people respect you more. When you show your rough edges, people feel safer showing theirs. Authenticity is not just good for you, it's a gift to everyone around you. Key takeaway: the greatest gift you can give the world is your authentic self. Not a polished, performed version. The real, imperfect, evolving you. This takes courage, but the alternative, a life of pretense, is far more costly. Reflection prompt. What's one area of your life where you're currently performing rather than being authentic? What would it look like to show up as your real self in that area? Chapter 11. Turning lemons into lemonade. Summary: life will inevitably hand you difficulties. The question isn't whether you'll face hardship, it's how you'll respond to it. In this chapter, we'll explore the remarkable human capacity to transform adversity into advantage, to find meaning in suffering, and to grow through challenge. We'll meet people who turned their greatest setbacks into their greatest triumphs, and we'll learn the mental habits that make such transformation possible. By the end, you'll have a new framework for approaching life's inevitable difficulties. There's a simple phrase that has guided some of the most resilient people I've ever known. When life hands you a lemon, make lemonade. It sounds trite, I know, but behind that folksy wisdom is a profound psychological truth. The meaning of any event is not inherent in the event itself. It's in how we interpret it, how we respond to it, how we integrate it into the story of our lives. Two people can experience exactly the same setback: a job loss, a relationship ending, a health crisis, and one will be destroyed by it while the other will emerge stronger. The difference isn't in the event, it's in the response. I've seen this principle at work in remarkable ways. There was a woman I knew who lost her husband suddenly. In her grief, she could have withdrawn from the world, could have let bitterness consume her. Instead, she threw herself into helping others who had experienced similar losses. She started a support group. She became a source of comfort and wisdom for countless grieving spouses. Her loss didn't disappear. She would always miss her husband. But she transformed that loss into something meaningful, something that made a difference in the world. There was a man who lost both legs in an accident. He spent months in despair, raging against what had happened to him. But eventually, he made a choice. He decided that his life wasn't over. It was just different. He learned to use a wheelchair. He went back to work. He became an advocate for disability rights. When I met him years later, he told me something I'll never forget. I'm almost grateful for the accident now. Not because I wanted to lose my legs. Of course I didn't. But because the person I became in response to that loss is someone I'm proud to be. I don't think I would have become that person otherwise. This is the alchemy of the human spirit. The capacity to transform suffering into strength, setback into growth, lemon into lemonade. The ingredients of resilience. How do some people manage to do this? What sets them apart? Research and experience point to several key factors. First, resilient people take responsibility for their response. They don't waste energy blaming others or railing against the unfairness of life. They acknowledge the difficulty they're facing, but they focus on what they can control. Their own attitude and actions. Second, resilient people look for the opportunity within the crisis. Every setback closes some doors, but it also opens others. The loss of a job might be the push you needed to start the business you'd always dreamed of. The end of a relationship might free you to discover who you are on your own. The health scare might motivate you to finally take care of your body. This isn't toxic positivity, pretending that bad things are actually good. It's strategic optimism, looking for whatever genuine opportunity might exist within the difficulty. Third, resilient people maintain perspective. They recognize that most setbacks are temporary, not permanent. They don't catastrophize. They don't take one failure and extrapolate it into a lifetime of failure. They remind themselves that they've survived difficulties before and will survive this one too. Fourth, resilient people stay connected. They don't isolate themselves in their suffering. They reach out to friends, family, community. They accept help. They recognize that we're all in this together, that everyone faces hardship, that no one has to face it alone. The practice of reframing. One of the most powerful tools for building resilience is reframing, the practice of deliberately choosing how you interpret events. Here's an example. Let's say you make a mistake at work, a significant one that costs the company money and damages your reputation. The automatic interpretation might be, I'm incompetent. I'm going to get fired. My career is over. Everyone thinks I'm an idiot. A reframed interpretation might be, I made a mistake, a serious one. I need to take responsibility, make amends, and learn from this. This experience, painful as it is, will make me more careful and more skilled in the future. I've seen other people recover from worse mistakes. I can recover from this one too. Notice that the reframed version doesn't deny the seriousness of the mistake. It doesn't pretend everything is fine. It acknowledges the difficulty while also recognizing that the difficulty isn't the end of the story. This reframing isn't automatic. It takes practice. Your brain has been trained over years to default to certain interpretations. Changing those defaults requires conscious effort. One effective practice, when you notice yourself interpreting something negatively, pause and ask, is there another way to see this? What would someone who loves me say about this situation? What might I think about this a year from now? These questions interrupt the automatic negative spiral and create space for a more balanced perspective. The gift of limitations. Here's something counterintuitive. Many of the most accomplished people in history achieved greatness not despite their limitations, but because of them. Beethoven composed his greatest music after he went deaf. Milton wrote Paradise Lost after he went blind. Helen Keller, blind and deaf from early childhood, became one of the most inspiring figures of her era. Franklin Roosevelt led the nation through the Depression and World War II from a wheelchair. These people didn't overcome their limitations. They worked with them. Their limitations forced them to develop capacities they might never have discovered otherwise. They had to find different ways of perceiving, different ways of creating, different ways of connecting. And those different ways made them extraordinary. The psychologist Alfred Adler, who spent his life studying human potential, concluded that the drive to compensate for perceived weaknesses is one of the most powerful forces in human development. The child who feels physically weak becomes an athlete. The person who struggles with reading becomes a writer. The immigrant who doesn't speak the language becomes a master communicator. Your limitations are not just obstacles to overcome. They're compasses pointing toward your potential for growth. The areas where you struggle most may be the areas where you have the most to offer, because you've had to work harder, think deeper, and develop more creative solutions than someone for whom those things came easily. Key takeaway: adversity is inevitable, but defeat is optional. The most resilient people are not those who avoid difficulty. They're those who have learned to transform difficulty into growth, setback into strength, and lemons into lemonade. Reflection prompt: think about a significant difficulty in your life, past or present. If you were to look for the opportunity within that difficulty, what might you find? What doors might this challenge be opening, even as it closes others? Chapter 12. The Art of Living Peacefully in a Troubled World. Summary. In our final chapter, we'll bring together everything we've explored: attraction, communication, relationships, worry, authenticity, and see how they all connect to a single fundamental question: how do we live well? We'll explore the daily practices, the mental habits, and the core values that create a life of genuine fulfillment. By the end, you'll have not just knowledge, but a practical philosophy for navigating life's challenges with grace, connecting deeply with others, and finding peace in the midst of chaos. We've covered a lot of ground. We've explored why neediness repels and authenticity attracts. We've learned how vulnerability, far from being weakness, is the gateway to genuine connection. We've decoded the mysterious differences between how men and women communicate, and we've discovered practical tools for bridging those differences. We've confronted the worry habit that steals our peace, and we've armed ourselves with strategies for breaking that habit. We've explored the profound connection between mental state and physical health. We've learned to be ourselves, to turn adversity into advantage, to live with greater authenticity and courage. But all of this knowledge, all of these insights, all of these strategies, they only matter if they actually change how we live. The most brilliant understanding is worthless if it stays in the realm of theory. So let me offer you a few guiding principles for putting all of this into practice, principles that I've seen transform lives again and again. Principle 1. Live in the present. The past is gone. The future isn't here. The only moment you ever actually have is this one, right now. This isn't just philosophical wordplay. It's a practical truth with profound implications. When you're worrying about tomorrow, you're not present for today. When you're regretting yesterday, you're missing the opportunities of now. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens, and the only place where you can actually do anything. I'm not suggesting you should never plan or reflect. Of course you should, but plan efficiently, reflect briefly, and then return to the present. Don't let your mind live somewhere your body isn't. One practice that helps: several times a day, pause and ask yourself, what's actually happening right now? What do I see, hear, feel? What's actually real in this moment? This simple check-in can pull you out of the anxious spiral of future-oriented worry and ground you in what's actually happening. Here's an example. Let's say you make a mistake at work, a significant one that costs the company money and damages your reputation. The automatic interpretation might be, I'm incompetent. I'm going to get fired. My career is over. Everyone thinks I'm an idiot. A reframed interpretation might be, I made a mistake, a serious one. I need to take responsibility, make amends, and learn from this. This experience, painful as it is, will make me more careful and more skilled in the future. I've seen other people recover from worse mistakes. I can recover from this one too. Notice that the reframed version doesn't deny the seriousness of the mistake. It doesn't pretend everything is fine. It acknowledges the difficulty while also recognizing that the difficulty isn't the end of the story. This reframing isn't automatic. It takes practice. Your brain has been trained over years to default to certain interpretations. Changing those defaults requires conscious effort. One effective practice: when you notice yourself interpreting something negatively, pause and ask, is there another way to see this? What would someone who loves me say about this situation? What might I think about this a year from now? These questions interrupt the automatic negative spiral and create space for a more balanced perspective. The gift of limitations. Here's something counterintuitive. Many of the most accomplished people in history achieved greatness not despite their limitations, but because of them. Beethoven composed his greatest music after he went deaf. Milton wrote Paradise Lost after he went blind. Helen Keller, blind and deaf from early childhood, became one of the most inspiring figures of her era. Franklin Roosevelt led the nation through the Depression and World War II from a wheelchair. These people didn't overcome their limitations, they worked with them. Their limitations forced them to develop capacities they might never have discovered otherwise. They had to find different ways of perceiving, different ways of creating, different ways of connecting, and those different ways made them extraordinary. The psychologist Alfred Adler, who spent his life studying human potential, concluded that the drive to compensate for perceived weaknesses is one of the most powerful forces in human development. The child who feels physically weak becomes an athlete. The person who struggles with reading becomes a writer. The immigrant who doesn't speak the language becomes a master communicator. Your limitations are not just obstacles to overcome, they're compasses pointing toward your potential for growth. The areas where you struggle most may be the areas where you have the most to offer, because you've had to work harder, think deeper, and develop more creative solutions than someone for whom those things came easily. Key takeaway: adversity is inevitable, but defeat is optional. The most resilient people are not those who avoid difficulty. They're those who have learned to transform difficulty into growth, setback into strength, and lemons into lemonade. Reflection prompt. Think about a significant difficulty in your life, past or present. If you were to look for the opportunity within that difficulty, what might you find? What doors might this challenge be opening even as it closes others? Chapter 12. The Art of Living Peacefully in a Troubled World. Summary: in our final chapter, we'll bring together everything we've explored: attraction, communication, relationships, worry, authenticity, and see how they all connect to a single fundamental question. How do we live well? We'll explore the daily practices, the mental habits, and the core values that create a life of genuine fulfillment. By the end, you'll have not just knowledge, but a practical philosophy for navigating life's challenges with grace, connecting deeply with others, and finding peace in the midst of chaos. We've covered a lot of ground. We've explored why neediness repels and authenticity attracts. We've learned how vulnerability, far from being weakness, is the gateway to genuine connection. We've decoded the mysterious differences between how men and women communicate, and we've discovered practical tools for bridging those differences. We've confronted the worry habit that steals our peace, and we've armed ourselves with strategies for breaking that habit. We've explored the profound connection between mental state and physical health. We've learned to be ourselves, to turn adversity into advantage, to live with greater authenticity and courage. But all of this knowledge, all of these insights, all of these strategies, they only matter if they actually change how we live. The most brilliant understanding is worthless if it stays in the realm of theory. So let me offer you a few guiding principles for putting all of this into practice, principles that I've seen transform lives again and again. Principle 1. Live in the present. The past is gone. The future isn't here. The only moment you ever actually have is this one, right now. This isn't just philosophical wordplay. It's a practical truth with profound implications. When you're worrying about tomorrow, you're not present for today. When you're regretting yesterday, you're missing the opportunities of now. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens, and the only place where you can actually do anything. I'm not suggesting you should never plan or reflect. Of course you should, but plan efficiently, reflect briefly, and then return to the present. Don't let your mind live somewhere your body isn't. One practice that helps: several times a day, pause and ask yourself, what's actually happening right now? What do I see, hear, feel? What's actually real in this moment? This simple check-in can pull you out of the anxious spiral of future-oriented worry and ground you in what's actually happening. Principle 2. Focus on what you can control. So much of our suffering comes from trying to control things that aren't within our control. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, the past. We exhaust ourselves fighting battles we can't win, and then we have no energy left for the battles we could actually influence. The Stoic philosophers understood this 2,000 years ago. Epictetus taught, some things are within our power, some are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, in short, whatever is our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, in short, whatever is not our own doing. When you truly internalize this distinction, a great burden lifts. You stop trying to manage what others think of you, because you can't control that. You focus instead on being the kind of person you want to be, because that is within your control. You stop trying to guarantee outcomes, because outcomes are always uncertain. You focus instead on giving your best effort, because effort is within your control. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. It means you channel your energy where it can actually make a difference, and you release your attachment to outcomes you can't determine. Principle 3. Cultivate genuine relationships. At the end of the day, what matters most is not your accomplishments, not your possessions, not your status. It's the quality of your relationships. It's whether you loved and were loved. It's whether you showed up fully for the people who mattered. It's whether you made a difference in the lives of others. Everything we've explored in this book, understanding attraction, mastering communication, overcoming worry, is ultimately in service of this one goal: deeper, more authentic, more fulfilling relationships. So prioritize connection. Make time for the people you love. Be present with them when you're together. Express your appreciation. Have the difficult conversations. Forgive. Ask for forgiveness. Don't let pride or fear keep you from the vulnerability that genuine intimacy requires. Principle 4. Keep growing. The moment you think you've arrived, that you've figured it all out, is the moment you start stagnating. Life is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to experience, more to become. Stay curious. Keep challenging yourself. Seek out new experiences, new perspectives, new skills. Surround yourself with people who inspire you to grow. Be willing to be a beginner again and again. This growth mindset is what keeps life vital and interesting. It's what prevents the midlife crisis of wondering, is this all there is? Because when you're growing, you're alive. When you're stagnant, you're just waiting. Principle 5. Be of service. The surest cure for worry, self-doubt, and existential angst is to get out of your own head and focus on helping others. When you're genuinely engaged in making a difference for someone else, your own problems shrink. Your perspective expands. You feel connected to something larger than yourself. This doesn't require grand gestures. You don't have to change the world. You just have to show up for the people in your life. Your family, your friends, your colleagues, your community. Listen to someone who needs to be heard. Offer a hand to someone who's struggling. Share what you've learned with someone who could benefit. The paradox of service is that the more you give, the more you receive. Not in a transactional sense, but in the deeper sense of finding meaning and purpose and connection. The people who are most fulfilled are rarely the people who have accumulated the most for themselves. They're the people who have contributed the most to others. A final word. As I bring this book to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Everything we've discussed, all the strategies, all the insights, all the techniques, they all point toward a single truth. You are capable of more than you realize. You are capable of deeper love, more authentic connection, greater courage, and more profound peace than you currently experience. Not because you're special, though you are, but because these capacities are built into the architecture of being human. They're your birthright. They just need to be developed. The journey won't be easy. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when you fall back into old patterns of neediness, worry, or disconnection. That's normal. That's human. Don't beat yourself up. Just notice what happened, learn from it, and keep going. Every day is a new opportunity. Every interaction is a chance to practice being more authentic, more courageous, more present. Every worry is an invitation to remember what actually matters. Every relationship is a laboratory for learning to love better. I cannot promise you a life free from difficulty, but I can promise you this. If you take these principles seriously, if you practice them consistently, your life will become richer, your relationships will become deeper, and your experience of everyday existence will become more peaceful and more joyful. And isn't that what we're all really looking for? Thank you for taking this journey with me. Now go and live it. End of book.